Chapter 1698. A layer of sluggish chi activity spread out. The sword aura was monstrous. The golden sword shadow, which seemed to be able to cut through mountains and rivers, instantly fell into silence. It was like a sword in a painting, but also like a shadow in the water. The big shots liked to watch from afar. It was not only to maintain their status, but also to maintain their distance. They could adjust their attitude at any time according to the changes in the situation. The true leaders of Yen Ran Mountain were observing the heaven-splitting sword sect through the projection screen. At this moment, their expressions changed slightly. Sword sealing talisman. At this moment, the situation on the projection screen changed again. As the word shattered, the aura enveloped the sword shadow. Jin Gung's pupils constricted violently as he felt a strong sense of uneasiness and fear. His eyes instantly turned golden. Without any hesitation, he used a taboo technique that he had yet to fully grasp. The golden sword shadow that had been sealed suddenly brightened. Countless cracks appeared on the surface of its sluggish aura. It was like a sieve that was riddled with holes and was about to shatter at any moment. At this time, Qin Yu flicked his finger. A beam of light flew out and struck the point between Jin Gung's eyebrows before submerging into his body. His entire body froze on the spot, and his pair of golden eyes became vacant. Soul-setting divine light. Naturally, he had to listen to Little Meat's reminder seriously. Today was the first time he put it into practice, and it was indeed a pleasant surprise. It was unknown whether or not it was because of the sun and moon that resided in his soul space, but their might was stronger than he had imagined, forcefully interrupting Jin Gung's counterattack. Without any hesitation, Qin Yu formed a sword with his fingers and thrust it towards the point between the man's eyebrows. "Don't you dare hurt my young master!" The disheveled old man roared and charged over without a care for his own safety. It wasn't that his reaction was slow, but the tables had truly turned in the blink of an eye. Just a moment ago, Jin Gung had held the upper hand and was just about to cut down Qin Yu. But in the blink of an eye, he had fallen into such a dangerous situation. Humph! A cold snort sounded in everyone's ears. The old man who had rushed out was sent flying by a sword light. Blood seeped out of the 7 orifices of his head, and his skin cracked, dyeing his robe red in an instant. As he tumbled, he smashed into the ground. The cold laughter resounded in everyone's ears. Regardless of whether they were here or in front of the projection, everyone could hear it clearly. Is there no more rules in Yen Ran Mountain now? Pa! The space between Jin Gung's eyebrows exploded, and his headless corpse fell to the ground. But the next scene could be said to be strange. The corpse's flesh and blood rapidly shriveled and withered, and all the blood essence gushed out, forming another Jin Gung out of thin air. His face was deathly pale. "I admit defeat," he said without hesitation. Across from him, Qin Yu frowned. "Shua!" Hu Fu's figure appeared before Jin Gung. He said, "According to Yen Ran Mountain's rules, the sword seeker has already admitted defeat. This matter ends here." What if he interfered with Q-Sword without permission? Hu Fu remained expressionless. "The death penalty." Meaty Meat sneered. "That's what you said." The messy old man, who was rolling on the ground with a bloody gourd, suddenly widened his eyes and exploded with a bang. In an instant, his body was smashed into pieces. Even if he had a way to die as well, he definitely wouldn't be able to come back to life. "Hu Fu, it's time to settle the grudge between us." Hu Fu looked up towards the entrance of the heaven-splitting sword sect. 3 days from now, my sect will come to bestow the sword." "Very good." Meaty Meaty's voice faded away. Hu Fu glanced at Qin Yu. He turned and said, "Sir Jin, I will send you off." Jin Gung cupped his hands together. "Thank you, Sect Master Hu Fu." He turned and left without any hesitation. The maid who had been watching the battle from afar came over with a pale face. Jin Gung didn't refuse. He was indeed extremely weak right now. Did he hate him? Of course, he hated him. But Jin Gung didn't reveal any of this. A loss was a loss. Being incompetent and angry was meaningless. Hu Fu revealed an apologetic expression. Sir Jin, I am truly sorry. I was careless and couldn't save you in time, causing you to suffer a great loss. Jin Gung shook his head. If it weren't for Sect Master saving me today, I fear I would have already died. I can't even thank you enough. So how could I dare to complain? He cupped his hands together. The keepsake on my body has been activated along with my fake death. The old ancestor will soon send someone to bring me back home. Before that, I will have to trouble Sect Master for several more days. Hu Fu nodded. There is no problem. Sir Jin can heal your wounds in the heaven-splitting sword sect. I can guarantee your safety. He flicked his sleeves. His aura covered the three of them, and they vanished from sight. As Jin Gung was defeated and replaced his life, the area outside the entrance of the heaven-splitting sword sect finally quieted down. With shocked hearts, everyone knew that the heaven-splitting sword sect had managed to hold on for the first wave. They had smoothly regained control of the sect and completed the first step of establishing a new sect. But the troubles didn't end here. The bestowment of swords that Hu Fu spoke of was a test that all sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain had to experience when they re-established their sect. What was tested was the true strength of a sect. At the same time, it was also a sect that still had incense burning to this day. The three bestowments of swords required the three executors to be true sword path powerhouses that were recognized by the many sword cultivators of Swallow Ran Mountain. And looking at the entire Swallow Ran Mountain, there were only a dozen or so people that could satisfy this requirement. Only by making it through could they be considered successful and be reaccepted by Swallow Ran Mountain. As for the incense burning that was mentioned just now, that was because of the three trials of bestowment of swords. There was a certain amount of room for manipulation, but no one thought highly of the heaven-splitting sword sect. In the past, the heaven-splitting sword sect had made enemies all over the place, causing them to be unable to find strong support when they were on the verge of life or death. Moreover, so much time had passed. Even if there were any incense burning in the past, the remaining incense burning had long since been erased. To sum it up, the heaven-splitting sword sect's debut show had been a perfect score. This Qin Yu from the Inheritance sect had given everyone an extremely fierce impression. However, there was still no one who was optimistic about the heaven-splitting sword sect's future. Most felt that they would not be able to survive the three tests. Ignoring the others, just the terrifying heavenly cycle sword sects Hu Fu was enough to make the heaven-splitting sword sect suffer. Moreover, that young master of the Jin family had been killed by Qin Yu once, and he had only managed to survive by borrowing a substitute item. There was no need to even think about the value of the death substitute. Who knew if the Jin family would take this opportunity to make a move? 3 tests of bestowing sword? Qin Yu sucked in a deep breath. His eyes subconsciously widened. This was the first time he had heard Little Meaty speak of the key to establishing the sect. After figuring out the meaning, Qin Yu didn't hesitate. His first thought was to immediately flee from Swallow Run Mountain. What kind of joke was this? Ignoring everything else, just the heavenly cycle sword sects Hu Fu, who had given him a serious look today, might not have attacked, but the terrifying sword intent he exuded was enough to make one's heart shudder. Was this the plan that Little Meaty and Niu Dingshan had come up with? What was going on? Was this a plan to seek death on his own initiative? He didn't speak, but his eyes were already filled with joy, expressing his attitude. Little Meaty coldly sneered, "What are you panicking for?" Qin Yu's eyes brightened. "Aye, Meaty want to do it herself? If so, then he certainly had nothing to fear. What 3 tests of bestowing sword? All of these people in front of him were trash." Little Meaty shook her head. Qin Yu's complexion collapsed. "Do you think I can withstand the 3 tests of bestowing sword?" His lips twitched. He took a deep breath and said, Little Meaty, don't you think your confidence in me is a bit too excessive? Little Meaty curled her lips. You're as timid as a mouse. You and that pheasant are truly worthy of being a master and servant. Chin Yu rubbed his face. I think this should be called acting within one's means. It shouldn't be called being timid, right? Moreover, after I gave the chicken overlord to you, I haven't seen it for a long time. He looked at Meaty's rosy lips and dryly coughed. You couldn't have been so hungry one day that you ate it, right? Little Meaty rolled her eyes. What's so delicious about a pheasant? If you want to eat it, you'll have to wait until it grows up. Don't try to change the subject. Let's not go anywhere. We'll stay at Swallow Run Mountain. Chin Yu clenched his teeth. Then tell me, how do I survive? Little Meaty flipped her hand and took out a token. She placed it in front of Chin Yu. This was something he found familiar. After thinking for a moment, he remembered that it was something Niu Dingtian had given her before he left. It doesn't matter if you don't recognize it. All you need to know is that this token can offset a single bestowing sword. As she finished speaking, she took out another short sword. It was mottled with rust, as if it would break with just a little bit of force. This sword can also offset a single bestowing sword. Chin Yu's eyes brightened once more. He stared at Little Meaty, waiting for her to take out more things. But first class and second class didn't follow. Little Meaty, with your wisdom and foresight, you definitely wouldn't have only prepared these two things, right? Little Meaty coldly sneered. I'm sorry, but I must disappoint Sir Chin. I really only prepared these two. Her eyes were earnest. The third bestowing sword will definitely be Hufu. You will have to rely on yourself to survive. Although it seemed like the difficulty had been reduced by over half, death was something like a single sword, whether it was reduced or not. Death would always be there, never leaving. He glanced at Little Meaty's complexion and determined that she wasn't joking. Chin Yu took a deep breath. If you want me to risk my life, you should at least give me the sword, right? Little Meaty nodded and then shook her head. I will give it to you, but not now. Chin Yu bitterly smiled. Don't mess around. It's already come to this, and if you don't give it to me, you will undoubtedly die facing Hufu. Little Meaty turned and walked away. I will go and arrange for the first two bestowing swords. Shwa, she vanished from sight. Chin Yu's teeth ached. He looked left and right several times. He couldn't help but think, how about I just run away right now? But this thought only circled around for a moment before he discarded it without hesitation. There was no other reason. It simply wouldn't work. With Little Meaty's methods, wanting to escape from under her eyes was harder than ascending to the heavens. Rather than being caught after running away and feeling so embarrassed that he wanted to crawl into a hole, he might as well grit his teeth and stubbornly hold on. Chin Yu didn't believe that Little Meaty would really arrange such a situation for him to die. He clenched his teeth and suppressed this thought. Chin Yu sat down cross-legged. There was only so much time left. There wasn't enough time to cultivate. What he was thinking right now was to calculate the things in his hands so that he wouldn't be killed as soon as they met. Little Meaty definitely had a backup plan. He would definitely use the small world. But facing Hufu, it probably wouldn't be of much use. The second was the soul-setting godlight that he had performed a great merit for today. Unfortunately, he had already used it today, and it would definitely be remembered by some people. It would be difficult for it to have any miraculous effects again, but he still had to use it. At the very least, he would be able to fight for a little more chance of survival in this hopeless situation. The third was the sword sealing talisman that he had used before. This was something that Chin Yu had comprehended from the books that Jiang Huan had left behind. He had exhausted countless brain cells in order to comprehend it. Its power was quite good. Disregarding everything else, if it could seal away the golden sword shadows, then it would definitely be able to block Hufu's sword. What a pity. It would be much better if he could only use a single sword in the 3 bestowing swords. Chapter 1699. As he thought of these things, Chin Yu unknowingly fell asleep. He lowered his head and closed his eyes, his breathing relaxing. Little Meaty, who had already left, quietly returned and appeared by his side. Glancing at Chinyu, Meaty looked up at the skies, at the monstrous sword shadows that shot into the skies. She knew that the test had already begun. It came from the inextinguishable sword spirit of the heaven-splitting sword sect, and this test could not be interfered with by flesh. Otherwise, things would not have been so troublesome. The stones in the latrine pit were smelly and hard. Otherwise, one of the dignified 10-sword sects of Swallow Mountain all those years ago wouldn't have fallen to such a state because of an unexpected event. Thinking for a moment, Little Meaty lifted a hand and pointed out. The space around Chinyu suddenly became densely packed, constantly stacking up and forming a space cage. Nothing could be seen on the surface, but without her permission, anyone who stepped inside would instantly be lost in the layers of space. He sat cross-legged at the side. The attitude and choice of the sword spirit was a crucial part of the plan. She had to get the results before she could make further arrangements. And this was also the reason why Meaty hadn't given the mountain and river sword to Chinyu. An immortal sword that was born with a spirit was a treasure that any sword cultivator in the world yearned for even in their dreams. The opportunity was right in front of him. Whether or not he could grasp it would depend on his own good fortune. In a daze, Chinyu had a very strange dream. In this dream, he became a sword cultivator with ordinary talent. He had a master who was serious on the surface, but gentle on the inside. He had 2 senior brothers and a junior sister. Among the 4 of them, his cultivation speed was the slowest, and he was always mocked. But strangely, as the one being ridiculed, he was not angry at all. Afterwards, Chinyu realized that this was a method of getting closer to sword cultivators. His 2 senior apprentice brothers and junior apprentice sister hoped to use this method to stimulate his fighting spirit. The effect was not good. As the 3rd ranked disciple of Sword Peak, his cultivation had always been the slowest. Even some juniors of Sword Peak had gradually caught up to him and surpassed his cultivation boundary. That's right, this disciple of Sword Peak is also called Chinyu. He actually has the same name and surname as me. It seems we are fated. Chinyu's consciousness was a bit blurry, hovering between clarity and confusion. He could sense everything that was happening in his dream, but he couldn't interfere. He could only be a bystander. Master always spoke earnestly and earnestly. Cultivating the sword is not only about cultivating strength, but also pursuing the sword without regret. This is the great Tao of sword cultivators of our generation. You're on the right path, so there's no need to rush. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to walk slower so that you can see the scenery along the way. Chinyu knew that his master was comforting him. When he was teaching his 2 senior apprentice brothers and junior apprentice sister, his attitude wasn't like this. What he meant was, we sword cultivators have the greatest killing power in the world, and when we draw our swords, we have to make ghosts and gods bow down to us. We are quick to repay favors and grudges, and we are never sloppy. Listen to me. Chinyu was a bit moved. He worked even harder in his cultivation, but something like talent really made him angry. Chinyu tried his best, but the results were minimal. Gradually, there were more and more people on Sword Peak. Master became the patriarch, and the disciples of senior brother and junior sister also became the teachers of others. He relied on his seniority to become the sword sect's martial ancestral uncle. But seniority is never the most important in our sword sect. What's the name of our sword sect? You looked into the distance. There was a massive stone tablet at the entrance to the mountain. The sword intent on it was monstrous and boundless, but no matter how he looked at it, it was blurry. Perhaps it was because his cultivation was too low that he couldn't even see the name of the sect. You secretly laughed at himself. After an unknown period of time, the atmosphere of Sword Peak became tense. His master said that a powerful enemy was invading, and he wanted them to prepare for war. His 2 senior apprentice brothers and junior apprentice sister were given tasks. When it was his turn, his master thought for a moment and said, "Qin Yu, defend Sword Peak and stabilize the rear." At this moment, countless eyes gathered on him. Qin Yu lowered his head. He knew that a powerful enemy had arrived, so how could there be any rear? His master was protecting his self-respect. The enemy had arrived, and they were extremely strong. His 2 senior apprentice brothers had perished, and then his master. Now, only his junior apprentice sister was left. Disciples of Sword Peak, break through the encirclement and ensure that the inheritance of my sword sect is not lost. His junior apprentice sister's orders resounded through the world. Countless disciples wept bitter tears. They obeyed her orders and fled. They had already determined that the sword sect would not be able to escape today's calamity. If they fought to the death, they would only be throwing their lives away. At this moment, Qin Yu left Sword Peak. He grasped his sword and walked towards the battlefield. 3rd senior apprentice brother, go, go! His junior apprentice sister's voice was frantic. Qin Yu paused, a firm look in his eyes. Master has died, and my 2 senior apprentice brothers have also died. Where do you want me to go? Junior apprentice sister, you haven't called me senior apprentice brother in a long time. It's true that my talent is lacking, and I don't have much talent for cultivation, but at least I can accompany Master, and my 2 senior apprentice brothers will die with you. He lifted his hand and slashed out with his sword. Once the sword was drawn, there would be no regrets. Hum, with a sword sound. The sound of a sword rang out between the heavens and earth. A vast sword phantom appeared, crossing the skies like a bolt of lightning. The enemies that were wreaking havoc on Sword Peak froze where they stood. In the next moment, their heads were separated from their bodies. Blood gushed out like a rain of blood. The sword phantom didn't stop. It continued to cut into the skies, tearing apart the thick clouds. The light of the 9 suns sprinkled down. For the first time, Qin Yu could clearly see the stone tablet erected at the entrance. Heaven's splitting sword sect. As these 4 words entered his eyes, they were like burning hot iron that smashed into his soul. Qin Yu's spectator state was broken. He had fused with the consciousness of Sword Peak's 3rd senior apprentice brother. Sword in hand, he stood at the peak of Sword Peak. Blood rained down from above his head. Shwa! Qin Yu's eyes shot open. Right now, he was holding a sword in his hand. The sword was heavy and broad. 3 words were carved into it. Qin Yu didn't recognize them, but when he looked at them, he naturally knew what they meant. Mountain and River Sword. This sword had a spirit, and as Qin Yu opened his eyes to look at the sword within the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect, Sect Master, Hu Fu fiercely turned and glared at the entrance of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. Impossible. He clenched his teeth and roared out loud. His face darkened and his eyes filled with cruel, killing intent. In the skies above the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, the boundless sword phantom had vanished from sight. Hu Fu was well aware of what this meant. The Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's sword spirit had recognized him as its master. Puff, puff, countless cracks appeared in the surrounding space. The ground turned to powder, and the maids around him were turned into meat paste. The complexions of Ma Dangfeng and the other direct disciples of the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect changed. They hurriedly bowed their heads, panic on their faces. They didn't know what had happened that could cause their unfathomable master to suddenly lose his composure. But it was clear that all of this was related to the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. Taking a deep breath, Sect Master Hu Fu turned and stepped forwards. In the next moment, he appeared in a luxurious courtyard. On a soft couch, Jin Geng was frowning in thought. His pupils shrank before he composed himself. He smiled and cupped his hands together. Sect Master, for you to rush here in such a hurry, is there something you need? If this junior can do it, then I will not decline. Hu Fu said, the reason I came here today is because there is a matter I would like Sir Jin's help with. After a brief pause, he said, The heaven-splitting sword sex sword spirit recognized you as its master just now. Jean Gung's complexion changed. He blurted out, "Impossible." He quickly waved his hand. "This junior has no intention of disrespecting Sect Master. It is just that this matter is far too inconceivable. According to what I know, even if the sword spirit recognizes you as its master, it should only do so after the heaven-splitting sword sect truly reopens its gates." Hu Fu had no expression. "That is indeed the case, but the truth is in front of us." Jean Gung hesitated for a moment. He looked at Hu Fu and asked, "What does Sect Master want this junior to do?" "Sir Jean, rest assured that I will not ask the Jean family's powerhouses to participate in the bestowing of the sword. This is an internal matter of my Swallow Mountain Sword Sect." Hu Fu's words pierced through the worries in his heart. He looked straight at him. "I hope that I can borrow the Jean family's heaven-splitting sword." Jean Gung's expression immediately froze. Hu Fu lightly said, "If Sir Jean helps, then I can personally bestow the sword to you. Although it is impossible to obtain the complete sword orb, even if it is only an incomplete one, it should still be able to help Sir Jean improve his current situation. Helping the sect is also helping yourself. I hope that Sir Jean will consider this carefully." Jean Gung took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. "Very well, then I will try my best." When Meaty Meaty returned, Qin Yu was still staring at the mountain river sword in a daze. He couldn't figure out what was going on. It was just a dream. So why did he obtain a sword in his hands? Moreover, his thoughts were connected to it, as if it were a part of him. This was just too strange. Meaty Meaty, his eyes brightened. He stood up and rushed over, sword in hand. Meaty Meaty furrowed her eyebrows. She lifted a hand and pointed. "Stop, get away from me. What are you planning on doing?" Qin Yu revealed an awkward expression. He lowered the sword point. "I had a dream just now, and when I woke up I found this sword in my hands." Meaty Meaty's lips curved up. And then Qin Yu's eyes widened. What did she mean by then? This casual attitude made me feel as if I wasn't being taken seriously at all. "Don't you think this is strange?" Looking at his widened eyes, Meaty Meaty coldly sneered. "Did you really think that a dream would cause a treasure to crawl into your hands on its own?" Qin Yu blinked. He looked down at the mountain river sword and then at Meaty Meaty in front of him. "That's right. I believe in your judgment. That is the truth." Meaty Meaty lifted a hand and pointed at the sword in Qin Yu's hand. "It was refined by me, and the main materials were the 2 swords you gave me. Remember this clearly. In the future, no matter who asks, you must say this." Qin Yu let out a sigh of relief. So that was what happened. He nodded as he looked at the mountain river sword. All of his doubts vanished, and the more he looked at it, the more he liked it. Little Meaty refined this sword for me. No wonder it fits so well with me. Just by reaching out to grab it, I feel like it was born to be my treasure. Furthermore, the name Mountain and River Sword, just by listening to it, it sounded extremely domineering. There was simply no one else like it. Seeing Qin Yu's pleasantly surprised expression, Meaty rolled her eyes. "Do you remember what I just said?" Qin Yu nodded again and again. I remember. The Mountain River Sword was forged with my flesh. This is what everyone says when they ask." Little Meaty nodded in satisfaction. "The Mountain River Sword is something I prepared for you. It's a trump card for dealing with the 3 tests of the bestowal sword. Hide it well these 2 days, and don't use it carelessly." Qin Yu looked over with a questioning gaze. Meaty Meaty said, "It's done. All you need to do is face it. The Heavenly Cycle Sword Sex bestowment is imminent. Let me warn you, Hu Fu is very strong. Be careful not to get killed." Qin Yu lowered his head and looked at his sword. He hesitated for a moment and said, "I think I might have been too happy and inflated a little." He licked his lips. "I actually feel that with the mountain and river sword in hand, Hufu of the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect, is not a problem at all. Cough. Little Meaty, do you also feel that I suddenly inflated a lot? Little Meaty turned and left. Think about it yourself. A faint smile appeared on her face. Qin Yu's luck was indeed quite good sometimes. For example, this time, in Swallow Ran Mountain, the most lively and eye-catching matter was, of course, the reopening of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. The matter of Jingung, a disciple of the swordsman aristocratic family, taking the place of a dead person, had spread like wildfire, causing countless sword cultivators to cry out in alarm and fear. The sudden return of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had displayed an extremely tyrannical strength in the process. But just this alone was not enough to complete the reopening of the sect. 3. Sword bestowment tests. The Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect's Hufu would definitely personally take action. This was something that everyone in Swallow Ran Mountain knew. Swallow Ran Mountain Sword Sect expressed their tacit approval of his participation in the bestowment of swords. And soon, news of the other 2 bestowers also spread out. Spring Wind Sword Sect, Lisumo. This name was a little decadent, but it was one of the 10 sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain. And Lisumu was one of the newly rising sword immortals of the Spring Wind Sword Sect. He was incomparably strong, and it was said that he would become the next person in charge of the Spring Wind Sword Sect in the Sword Master Guild. Just this point was enough to prove his strength. Towards Lisumu taking action, there was only surprise in Swallow Ran Mountain. There was no doubt at all. He had enough qualifications. As for the last person to bestow the sword, he truly attracted the curiosity and confusion of the various sword sects in Yen Ran Mountain. Sword Forging Sect. As its name suggested, the sect itself was not skilled in the path of killing. Its main business was to help sword cultivators forge all sorts of immortal swords. In Swallow Ran Mountain, most of the immortal swords in the hands of the top sword cultivators, besides those obtained through lucky chances or inheritances, came from the Sword Forging Sect. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Sword Forging Sect had a wide network. They had always maintained a neutral stance and never interfered in the internal disputes of the sword sections. Because of this, the Sword Forging Sect was able to gain a foothold in Swallow Ran Mountain with the support of the other sword sections. Therefore, many people could not understand why the legendary sect leader of the Sword Forging Sect, Sect Leader Gu, would be bestowing the 3 tests of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. In the end, they could only blame it on the fact that the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had offended too many people in the past, and Sect Leader Gu was one of them. This explanation made sense and was enough to convince people. Everyone in Swallow Ran Mountain knew that the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had terrible relations with people, and Sect Leader Gu naturally had the qualifications to bestow swords. Previously, it was said that the Sword Forging Sect's main business was forging immortal swords. They were not skilled in the path of killing, but they were rich and overbearing. Sect Leader Gu was wearing a legendary immortal treasure from the White Jade Capital. Its defense was astonishing, and even sword immortals could not break it. The sword in his hand was made from the remains of an ancient immortal sword, supplemented with many treasures and painstakingly forged. Apart from that, he had many other supporting treasures, so many that he could not even count them with 2 hands. Therefore, in terms of cultivation and sword Dao, Sect Leader Gu was not in the top 20 of Swallow Ran Mountain. However, his overall combat strength was powerful. He had once chased after an old sword demon who owed him money, and the fierce battle had spanned more than half of Swallow Ran Mountain. That battle had caused the sky to change color, and millions of sword chi had crisscrossed. From then on, no one dared to deny the Sword Forging Sect's debts. Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect Leader Hufu. Spring Wind Sword Sect's Sword Immortal Lisumo. Sword Forging Sect Leader Gu, who was well equipped. These 3 bestowing swords could be said to be a grand lineup, and people could not look directly at them. Therefore, as the news spread, Many sword cultivators in Swallow Ran Mountain looked in the direction of the heaven-splitting sword sect. They could not help but look at the heaven-splitting sword sect with pity. Today's retribution was due to their ancestors' lack of virtue. They had to learn from this. You ask me what I think of the heaven-splitting sword sect's reopening. Yes, I admit that the heaven-splitting sword sect is indeed something, but they are finished. That's right, completely finished. Chapter 1700. Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect. Jean Gung's Courtyard. Sect Master. Hu Fu cupped his hands together. Greetings, old ancestor Jean. Across from him, the phantom turned around. He had an ordinary expression and a calm expression. I can lend you the heaven-splitting sword, but the price is not enough. Hu Fu seemed to have expected this. Old ancestor Jean, please speak. The phantom said, besides the sword pill, the Jean family also wants the heaven-splitting sword sect's heaven-splitting sword art. Hu Fu furrowed his eyebrows. The phantom continued to add, and the complete version. Hu Fu fell silent. The phantom's tone was indifferent. Sect Master can consider it. The Jean family is not in a hurry. Whether or not the heaven-splitting sword sect can reopen has little to do with my Jean family. Hu Fu's eyes exploded with a sharp light. He didn't refute. In front of his own interests, words were useless. He said, Good, I agree. The phantom smiled. Sect Master is truly smart. Before the sword bestowment date, the heaven-splitting sword will be delivered. Hu Fu cupped his hands together and left. Jean Gung walked over. His face was still pale as he respectfully bowed. Old ancestor, you cannot trust Hu Fu. The reason my grandson ended up like this is because he deliberately dragged my Jean family down with him. The phantom coldly snorted. That's because you are stupid. Jean Gung lowered his head, not daring to speak again. The phantom looked at him. But this time you still have merit. If my Jean family can smoothly obtain the heaven-splitting sword art, I will help you restore your cultivation. Jean Gung revealed a happy expression. Thank you, old ancestor. The time for the 3 sword bestowment tests had arrived. The first to attack was the well-equipped Sect Master Gu. Countless sword cultivators watched from Swallow Ran Mountain, their hearts filled with excitement. After so many years, they could finally see Sect Master Gu fight again. This was the so-called using wealth to subdue others. It was impossible to not be convinced. His fighting style was extremely pleasing to the eye, opening one's horizons. The first battle had caused one's blood to boil. The only thing that made everyone feel a bit helpless was that once Sect Master Gu fought, there would likely be no one else left. For the 3 sword bestowment tests to have no more sword bestowment tests was a pity. Outside the heaven-splitting sword sect, countless cultivators had gathered. Today, the majority were Swallow Ran Mountain sword cultivators. There was no lack of sword Dao geniuses that were the focus of attention from the various sword sections. All of them held their breaths and looked forward to the bestowment of swords. To them, being able to personally witness a senior of the way of the sword wielding his sword was an extremely beneficial matter. Naturally, they wouldn't miss this opportunity. I hope that Sect Master Gu will show mercy and not act too quickly. Otherwise, the moment the scarlet blood sword slashes down, the sword bestowment will be over. The heaven-splitting sword sect's Dao protector has always been mysterious and has never appeared in front of others. But judging from the inheritance sect's Qinyu, he should be someone with some cultivation. He might be able to last a little longer. I hope so. I didn't hesitate to interrupt my seclusion and rush to the heaven-splitting sword sect just to watch a battle at the pinnacle of sword principles. I hope you don't disappoint me. Yes, Path Protector of the heaven-splitting sword sect. Do your best. Outside the gate of the heaven-splitting sword sect, everyone was talking about it. Their eyes were bright and full of expectation. Their attitude toward the heaven-splitting sword sect was very clear. Hold on a little longer. After all, The one who did this was sect leader Gu, the #1 equipment expert of our swallow, Ran Mountain. Whoosh! In the distant skies, there was the cry of a sword. With a loud rumble, a sea of clouds was swept up. It was like a billowing tide, its momentum astonishing. In particular, for some unknown reason, this sea of clouds was crimson red. It gave off an increasingly oppressive feeling, one that made one's heart race. The Scarlet Blood Sword, Sect Master Gu. Shwa! A figure landed outside the gates of the heaven-splitting sword sect. In the skies above, the surging sea of blood-red clouds exploded with a loud bang, sweeping up in all directions and stirring up howling winds. The way he appeared was extremely flashy. In particular, Sect Master Gu was standing with his hands behind his back facing everyone. He was even more mysterious and awe-inspiring. In the next moment, cheers erupted. Countless Swallow Ran Mountain sword cultivators stared with wide eyes, their eyes bright. Sword cultivators of our generation should be like this, but it was unknown when they would be able to cultivate to a level comparable to Sect Master Gu. This was truly something they yearned for. At the gates of the heaven-splitting sword sect, Little Meaty's lips twitched. She turned to look at Chinyu. Look carefully. Sword cultivators are a group of people who like to show off. This surname Gu is especially serious. Don't believe the self-flattery of our generation. Most of those praises are fabricated by sword cultivators and deliberately spread out to trap ignorant young boys and girls. Chinyu's lips twitched. Little Meaty's words were extremely impolite. It was the same as slapping all the sword cultivators into the water. But looking at the scene in front of him, it seemed that this was indeed the case. Cough! Chinyu, who was now pretending to be a sword cultivator, said in a low voice, I'm going. Little Meaty looked at him. Do you understand what I mean? Chinyu thought for a moment. I understand. Wasn't it just because he wanted face? Then he had to act a bit more realistically. If he was too sloppy, this sect master Gu might not be able to extricate himself from the stage. After all, pretending to fight wasn't a good thing to say. In particular, in front of everyone's eyes today, this was too excessive. It was simply mocking everyone's intelligence. Shwa, space flashed. Chinyu's figure appeared. Outside the heaven-splitting sword sect gates, everyone hurriedly craned their necks to look behind him. But no matter how they looked, they couldn't see anything. What was the meaning of this? Where was the Tao protector of the heaven-splitting sword sect? The so-called Tao protector was not only to help the people of the heaven-splitting sword sect cultivate, but also to protect them on the most dangerous path. Today was clearly the most dangerous time. Could it be that the heaven-splitting sword sect had been terrified and decided to surrender without a fight after hearing about the grand combination of bestowing the sword 3 tests? That was truly a disgrace. Outside the gates, many sword cultivators clenched their jaws in front of a screen of light. If you want to admit defeat and shame, then wouldn't we have come here for nothing? Chin, you didn't let them gnaw on him for too long. He stepped forwards and cupped his hands together. Heaven-splitting sword sects, heaven-splitting sword sects, heaven-splitting sword sect. Chinyu greets Sect Master Gu. He stood up, his expression calm. Today's bestowed sword will be received by Chinyu alone. Whoosh! Many sword cultivators were thrown into an uproar. They all had looks of disbelief on their faces. This was even more inconceivable than before. Chinyu was seeking death. Jin Gang was indeed strong, but at most he could be considered an outstanding junior. Compared to a true senior of the sword path, there was still a massive disparity. Moreover, the one who bestowed the sword today was a true big shot of Swallow Mountain, arrogant to the extreme. This was simply the greatest disrespect and ridicule towards the sword cultivator big shots. A junior was far too insolent. Sect Master Gu frowned. His eyes were sharp. Chinyu, are you speaking the truth? The big shot wasn't satisfied. Chinyu's heart skipped a beat. His complexion didn't change at all. He cupped his hands together and said, "Although I am only someone from the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect, I am equal to the sect master of the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect. Since sect master Gu has come to bestow the sword, then I have the qualifications to receive it." Sect master Gu's eyebrows rose up. These words seemed reasonable. For the sword-forging sect's sect master to fight the future sect master of the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect was also reasonable. He immediately nodded. "Good. Please receive the sword." Qin Yu lifted his hands. With a heaven-shaking rumble, a small world instantly appeared. A wild strength erupted, causing the surrounding space and time to distort. At this time, space was collapsing and the earth was breaking apart. Winds and clouds were stirred up and the skies above suddenly changed. Sect Master Gu was very satisfied. At the very least, the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect knew how to conduct themselves and didn't embarrass him too much. Although they had come to open the back door, for better or worse, they still had to take care of their face. Bang! A terrifying sword intent erupted from the small world. It was majestic and awe-inspiring, as if it could cut apart mountains and rivers. Sect Master Gu's voice sounded out. "Sect Master Qin Yu, you really did have a hidden card." Bang! Another tyrannical sword intent instantly erupted, like a landslide and the earth splitting. "Good sword." Sect Master Gu calmly evaluated. Outside the small world, many sword cultivators had twisted expressions. They stared with wide eyes, but they couldn't see through the distortions in the small world. They could only sense the sword intent erupting from within. As they heard Sect Master Gu's voice, they felt an incomparably uncomfortable feeling in their hearts. They had already cursed Qin Yu countless times in their hearts. "We ran all the way here just to watch a great battle of the sword path. So what do you want us to watch?" This was simply preposterous. In particular, the sword intent erupting from the small world was ridiculously strong. Even from far away, they felt their hairs stand on end. If they could see it with their own eyes, they would surely be able to obtain benefits from it. As expected, if the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect dared to send the Inheritance sect's Qin Yu out to receive the sword, then they had a certain degree of confidence. However, they had clearly underestimated the strength of today's sword-bearer. Sect Master Gu is truly strong. On the Sword Peak, a direct disciple with outstanding talent but a low cultivation couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He had been left behind to watch the battle through a screen of light. He didn't discover that his expressionless master, who was watching the screen of light, was now fiercely twitching his lips. His lips moved, but in the end he didn't say anything. Sword cultivators also cared about face. If others were to know that the dignified Swallow Mountain's famous sect master, Gu of the Sword Forging sect, was actually a fake character, then where would Swallow Mountain's face as a holy land of the sword path be? Moreover, this surname Gu cared about face the most. If anyone tore off his skin, they would absolutely have a great enmity with him. For example, in the battle that made Sect Master Gu famous, when did the old sword demon even think about reneging on his debt? He had merely said a few words in front of a female sword immortal, and yet he had been used as a pretext for a great battle. He had even been forced to bear the consequences. Not only did he owe a debt, but he also had the infamy of acting shamelessly. Sword cultivators do have a good reputation, but it is extremely rare to have such a good reputation. He couldn't be provoked. At this moment, on the various sword peaks of Swallow Mountain, there were many who felt the same way as him. After all, although Qin Yu's small world tried its best to appear flashy, it couldn't obstruct their perception. They were well aware of everything that was happening inside. However, what puzzled the various elders of Swallow Mountain was why the Sword Forging sect was helping the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect. In terms of relationship, when the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect was destroyed, the Sword Forging sect had yet to flourish, let alone move into Swallow Mountain. The two sides clearly didn't have much interaction. This was likely another unsolved case. In addition, the heavenly cycle sword sects old who must be extremely angry right now. If he dared to stand out and call out Gu for pretending to fight, it would be even more exciting. But unfortunately, the heavenly cycle sword sects area was very peaceful. This left many people disappointed. Inside the small world, however, when Sect Master Gu threw out the first sword talisman and released the sealed sword intent, Qin Yu was given a fright. He almost thought that Little Meat was incompetent and had fallen into someone's trap. Fortunately, the sharp and terrifying sword intent slashed at empty air and didn't harm him at all. Then, Qin Yu saw Sect Master Gu speaking in a deadpan manner. The so-called self-directed and self-acted was nothing more than this. At this moment, Qin Yu felt from the bottom of his heart that there was always someone better than him. Ignoring the level of his acting skills, he couldn't learn from the way he handled matters, nor had he ever thought of it. This was the difference between them. Sect Master Gu looked up and his eyes fell on Qin Yu. His heart skipped a beat and he immediately regained his composure. Sect Master, don't worry. Today's matter will rot in this junior's stomach. I will not reveal a single thing. Nodding his head, Sect Leader Gu's face revealed a trace of satisfaction. He first threw out a sword talisman and solemnly said, "This sword is truly exquisite." Then he lowered his voice and said lightly, "I have no other choice. It's good that you can understand." Qin Yu said, I understand. But understanding was one thing. As he looked at Sect Master Gu casually tossing out sword talismans, his lips couldn't help but twitch. Sword talismans were things that powerful sword cultivators obtained after sealing away their sword intent. The more powerful it was, the more difficult it was to use. Once the seal was undone and the sword intent was released, it was the same as facing a sealed sword cultivator's attack. It could be said to be extremely precious, and its price was naturally astonishing. But looking at Sect Master Gu, he didn't seem to care at all. He had already casually tossed out 7 or 8 talismans. Just how much immortal money was this? TSK, he was inhumanly rich. But was there no hidden dangers if he did this? Qin Yu thought for a moment. He coughed and cupped his hands together. Sect Master Gu, this junior's small world isn't complete. I fear it will be difficult to isolate myself from the gazes of the sword path powerhouses of Swallow Mountain. He had to speak of this matter first. Otherwise, if he were to be held accountable afterwards, and if he flew into a rage out of shame, that would be troublesome. Sect Master Gu faintly smiled. Don't worry. Even if they see it, they won't say anything. After all, we've all been neighbors for so many years. Who doesn't have a dark history? As he spoke, he looked around. Although his expression was calm and there was a smile on his face, Qin Yu could swear that he could see a naked threat in his eyes. His heart sank. As expected, sword cultivators were just a bunch of people. Were they just like what they said? This was simply a complete collapse of their image. Farewell. My heart is bright and noble, a sword cultivator that can repay gratitude and enmity. Sect Master Gu glanced at him, as if he could see through his thoughts. Do you think this isn't good? Qin Yu quickly shook his head. He strangled the stubborn thoughts in his heart. No, this junior only feels that Sect Master Gu has been wronged in today's matter. When the heaven-splitting sword sect smoothly reopens, I will definitely pay a visit. Sect Master Gu coughed. Then let's agree on this. After the sect reopens, you will be the first to pay a visit to the sword forging sect. Qin Yu was startled. He was just being polite. There was no need for him to take it seriously, right? Moreover, Sect Master Gu seemed to have too much confidence in him, as if he were certain that the sect would smoothly reopen today. If he didn't even know about this, just where did his confidence come from? Then, Qin Yu reacted. Sect Master Gu was confident in Little Meat. The two of them had interacted before, and he could sense that there was something mystical about Little Meat's body. Thinking about it, the heaven-splitting sword sect's momentum was like a rainbow. After smoothly reopening their sect, the first person they would pay a visit to was the sword-forging sect. Just how much face was this? As expected, this was a good reputation. Qin Yu smiled, but his heart was wooden. He nodded. Across from him, Sect Master Gu's smile became even brighter. He happily waved his hand and tossed out another sword talisman. Then he shouted, "This sword is extraordinary. It can compare to the sword of the past." Since it was in the past, it definitely couldn't compare to the present. You really didn't forget to show off at any time and show off a little. Qin Yu took a deep breath. Sect Master Gu, this is enough. Sword talismans are precious. Seeing you use them like this makes my heart ache. Sect Master Gu hesitated. Is that so? But I still have a lot. I've only used less than a third of them. He had an expression of wanting to continue. Qin Yu's eyes jumped up. He hurriedly said, "You have to think about it this way. As the dignified sword-forging sect Master Gu, even if the battle was fierce, fighting with a junior like me for too long will damage your reputation." Sect Master Gu's complexion changed. He nodded. "You're right. Then let's stop here." He looked at Qin Yu, a look of appreciation on his face. "You brat, your thoughts are flexible enough. You were born to be a sword cultivator of my generation. Cultivate well in the future. I have high hopes for you." "What do you mean high hopes for me?" His image of a sword cultivator collapsed a second time. Qin Yu suppressed his ridicule. He sincerely said, "I thank Sect Master Gu for the praise." After a few breaths of time, the small world that was violently twisting and shaking, the movement it created was enough to shake the heavens and earth, suddenly disappeared. Qin Yu's complexion paled. He fluttered backwards and landed on the ground. Across from him, Sect Master Gu was still standing slightly to the side, his back facing the many sword cultivators outside. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, his expression calm. At this time, he was displaying his elegant demeanor. The heaven-splitting sword sect is indeed extraordinary. Consider this a sword bestowed by my sect as you're receiving it. His tone was light, the aura of a great master bursting forth. He turned around, leaving everyone with a sharp profile. Sect Master Gu took a step forward and vanished from sight. In the next moment, a sword aura thundered in the distance. A sea of blood red clouds appeared once more, rumbling into the distance. As they said, if one held a kitchen knife to cut down a wire, lightning would follow them along. It was truly amazing. Chapter 1701. Qin Yu revealed a look of awe, as if he had received great benefits. He cupped his hands together and bowed in the direction that Sect Master Gu had left. This scene caused the crowd of sword cultivators to grit their teeth. They wanted to shout out loud, "You shameless dog thief, give me back my lucky chance. You fought a great battle with Sect Master Gu in the small world, and you must have felt refreshed. But we didn't even glance at you." Thinking back to those terrifying sword intents just now and Sect Master Gu's calm and unhurried comments, everyone became even more indignant. Why had the sect master been so merciful? They should have cut this shameless dog thief in half with a single sword strike. Only then would they be able to dispel the hatred in their hearts. But thinking about it, if Qin Yu died like this, the bestowal of swords would end and they would have come here for nothing. They were so conflicted. They could only grit their teeth and curse inwardly. "I'll let you live a little longer. Once the spring wind sword sect's sword immortal, Li Sumu, makes his move, I'll make sure you lose your dog head." But thinking about it, this shameless dog thief shouldn't be playing the same trick as before, pulling out the small world and making it impossible to see anything, right? As the sword cultivators were worried, a light breeze blew past. It was like a willow tree brushing past their faces, bringing with it the flavor of spring. Qin Yu felt his vision blur, and then a figure appeared in front of him. What an incomparably handsome man! He was like a great sun in the skies, making one feel ashamed of their inferiority. Even though Qin didn't care too much about his appearance, he still couldn't help but feel a trace of jealousy. Then he bitterly smiled. He thought that to be so unreasonably handsome, to the point of angering the heavens, was truly difficult for him. Thinking about it, he probably didn't have any friends of the same sex since he was young, right? And your waist, how is it? Li Sumu wasn't unfamiliar with the eyes in front of him. Heaven-opening sword sex Qin. If you have no objections, then I will draw my sword. Qin Yu's heart shrank. He felt that these words were a bit cold, and his eyes were even colder. Was it because Little Meat was incompetent, or was it because he had clearly seen the bestowal of swords just now and was angry and dissatisfied? Qin Yu's intuition told him that it was the latter. But I've been wronged. I don't want to be so exaggerated. This sword immortal in front of me should be looking for sect Master Gu. Li Sumu didn't give Qin Yu any more time to complain. He waited for a breath of time and saw no response from Qin Yu. Then he slashed out his sword. Shwa! Tiny beads of sweat instantly appeared on Qin Yu's forehead. This sword shadow was right next to his ear, whistling past and slashing into the distance. Rumble! Behind Qin Yu, there was a violent explosion. A towering mountain outside the heaven-splitting sword sect was split in half. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. Countless rocks tumbled down. The sword cultivators outside the mountain gate who were affected fled in a sorry state. But they didn't dare to show any resentment or dissatisfaction on their faces. Instead, their eyes lit up and they cheered in their hearts. My generation of sword cultivators. My generation of sword cultivators. This was true elegance. With a slash of the sword, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. All living things bowed down. Unfortunately, Sword Immortal Li's strike had clearly missed its mark, and it hadn't struck Qin Yu. Otherwise, his head would have been separated from his body, and he would have died on the spot. But it didn't matter. For them, this was a good thing. To be able to see Sword Immortal Li strike again was something that many people dreamed of, disregarding everything else. Just today's 2 sword strikes were worth the price of the ticket. They hadn't come here in vain. As everyone's eyes widened, waiting for Li Sumu to strike again, he turned and left, vanishing from sight. The world fell silent. Everyone's eyes turned round, disbelief on their faces. This, as the saying went, one's heart was in chaos, unable to speak for a long time. This was probably what happened. Li Sumu, he left just like that? What was the meaning of this? What was the meaning of this sword strike? What were the rules of Swallow Ran Mountain? What was the meaning of bestowing a sword? This was simply throwing a match in front of everyone. How could they endure this? After the silence, there was still silence. Thus, the sword cultivators of Swallow Ran Mountain discovered that they could endure this. Otherwise, go find one of the 10 sword sects, the Spring Wind Sword Sect, and interrogate them? Or go find trouble with Li Sumu. Stop messing around. It was good to be alive. In the awkward silence, Qin Yu's lips twitched. He felt that the 2 people he had encountered today were far too interesting. Sect Master Gu was fine, but Li Sumu's actions placed a mountain of pressure on him. Now, the gazes of those sword cultivators gathered on Qin Yu, as if they had a deep hatred for him. It was as if it was because of him that something like this had happened today, something that shamed the entire holy land of swordsmanship, Swallow Ran Mountain. Although this was the truth, they also had to consider that Qin Yu was also innocent. Qin Yu resisted the urge to rub his face. He lightly coughed and cupped his hands together. Thank you, Sword Immortally, for bestowing me the sword. Thank you for letting me win. Forget about everything else. He had to decide victory and defeat first. Thus, in the next moment, those gazes that gathered on him turned into knives, wishing to cut Qin Yu to pieces. Before the bestowment of the sword began, who could have imagined that such a situation would occur? The heaven-splitting sword sect was just a single step away from being restored. The heavenly cycle sword sect's sect master, Hu Fu, stood up. The disciples behind him all fell to their knees. "Honorable Master." Jean Gung's lips twitched. He thought that these words were truly ominous. Luckily, the old ancestor had already ordered people to deliver the heaven-splitting sword. With Hu Fu's cultivation combined with the heaven-splitting sword art, his strength was simply unparalleled. Before this battle had even begun, Hu Fu was already in an undefeatable position. Thinking of this, a trace of hatred appeared deep in Jean Gung's eyes. This was the first time he had revealed his true emotions since he was defeated and used his life as a substitute. It passed in the blink of an eye. "Sect Master will win." Jean Gung smiled and cupped his hands together. Hu Fu nodded. He took a step forward and vanished from sight. Rumble, rumble. At the entrance of the heaven-splitting sword sect, space suddenly shattered. A terrifying sword aura swept out, tearing open countless spatial cracks. There were countless of them, like pairs of eyes suddenly opening at this moment. It left one's heart palpitating with fear. Hu Fu stepped out. At this moment, the world was deathly silent. Unlike before, everyone was silent. They could feel a mountain-like pressure pressing down on them, making it difficult for them to even breathe. Looking at the heavenly cycle sword sects, Hu Fu, who had directly shattered space and descended, they instinctively screamed and screamed. They could feel a thick, killing intent so thick that it seemed solid. It was like surging waves, roaring and roaring as it surged towards them. Even if the target wasn't them, they could still feel it from afar. They felt as if they were facing an abyss of destruction, as if they would be swallowed up in the next moment. So strong, so terrifying. As for Hu Fu's eruption of killing intent, that wasn't unexpected. After all, the relationship between the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect and the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect wasn't a secret in Swallow Mountain. In fear, and panic, the sword cultivators of Swallow Mountain began to roar out inwardly. "Qinyu, you are dead this time." Facing the incomparably powerful sect master, Hu Fu, who was filled with killing intent, they couldn't see any possibility of failure. Chapter 1702. The main character had appeared. Within Swallow Mountain, the various sword path elders all revealed dignified expressions. There was no need to mention sect Master Gu. If it weren't for his profound cultivation and equipment, he would have long since been labeled as the shame of the sword path. Li Sumu had always been a maverick and independent person. What he did today was even more infuriating than sect Master Gu. Even if it was a fake fight, for better or worse, he still put in some effort. So what did this count as? Where was the dignity and rules of the sword path, holy land, Swallow Mountain? If you could fight, you would have already knelt down and confessed your sins. Forget it. Just thinking about these two people makes my head hurt. Luckily, we still have old Hu here. Otherwise, if the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect smoothly reopened, everyone would have vomited blood. If news of this spread out and fell into the ears of those who didn't know the truth, how could this be the so-called holy land of the sword path? How could it be defeated by a junior? How laughable! How could the legendary figures of the Sword Dao and the big shots of the various factions accept this? As sword cultivators, we can cut off our heads and bleed, but we absolutely cannot lose face. Old Hu, you can do it. We'll support you. Wait a moment. Qinyu shouted out loud. I have fought 2 great battles in a row and have consumed a great deal of strength. I request to rest. This was in accordance with the rules. Hu Fu, who had rushed forwards with the momentum of wind and thunder and a monstrous killing intent, suddenly frowned. It was like he had already punched out a fist, but had forcefully stopped it halfway. His aura was in chaos, but Hu Fu was indeed worthy of being the master of sect. The scar on his face proved that he was a ruthless character who had experienced countless battles. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. Outside the mountain gates, many sword cultivators were cursing in front of a screen of light. This shameless dog thief was too cunning. He had forcefully delayed for time. The Sword Path elders that had witnessed the entire process all raised their eyebrows. They thought that this boy's skin was really thick enough. If he didn't die today, his future prospects would be limitless. Although the 3 sword bestowment tests were held on the same day, there was a 2-hour break between each test. Just now, Li Sumu's sword had been too fast. In addition, Qin Yu felt that this person had also been faking a fight, thus allowing him to take advantage of a loophole. Across from him, Hu Fu looked as if he were ready to fight to the death with him. How could Qin Yu allow him to do as he wished? Suffocate you to death? Countless sword cultivators stared at him, clenching their jaws. 2 hours soon passed. Just before the end of the time limit, Qin Yu suddenly shouted out loud, "Of the 3 trials of bestowing the sword, there are 2 chances to rest. I have yet to recover, so I request to rest for another 2 hours." On the other side, Hu Fu, who was quietly revolving his aura and forming the momentum of wind and thunder, let out a stuffy groan. His face flushed red and his body swayed. That damnable Qin Yu. He must have done it on purpose. He had waited until the time limit was up, causing him to nearly vomit blood. Countless sword cultivators glared at Qin Yu, wishing they could rush over and grab him by the neck. "You bastard, you want me to return the excitement of watching the battle." If they continued to be shaken like this, the swordsmen felt that their minds were going to go haywire. Hu Fu took a deep breath and stepped forwards. He sneered, "Hu Fu, the heaven-splitting sword sect, has already received 2 sword strikes. So what if they rest for 4 hours? This was in line with the rules. Could it be that you, sect master who of the heaven-splitting sword sect, would be afraid of a junior? Where there were people, there would be Jianghu. Much less a group of people with the slogan, 'I am a sword cultivator.' The Swallow Mountain beneath their feet was a giant Jianghu. If there was a Jianghu, there would be gratitude and grudges. Now, the one who had suddenly appeared outside the gates of the heaven-splitting sword sect was a wandering sword cultivator of Swallow Mountain. His name was Hu Jiming. It was said that he had obtained the inheritance of an ancient sword immortal and had his current cultivation. The origin of the grudge between Hu Jiming and the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect could no longer be verified, but there was no doubt that this grudge was serious. So it was reasonable for Hu Jiming to jump out and stir things up today. Hu Fu paled. "Io, you look so scary. Sect Master Hu, do you think that this is your Heavenly Cycle Sword sect where you can do whatever you want? If you want to climb into the bed of a female disciple, you can climb into the bed of a female disciple. Even a male disciple can't escape your demonic clutches." The sword cultivators all listened with wide eyes. Although they knew that the 2 sides didn't like each other, they had never personally witnessed a conflict between 2 big shots of the sword. Moreover, this topic was far too explosive. In the crowd, there were several sword cultivators from other sects that were fated to marry a female disciple of the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect. Their complexions changed, as if there were 10,000 horses galloping above their heads. "Shut up!" Hu Fu angrily shouted. "Hu Jiming, don't speak nonsense and ruin the reputation of my Heavenly Cycle Sword sect. After today, I will make you pay the price for this." Hu Jiming sneered. "A straight body doesn't fear a crooked shadow. For sect master, Hu to be so angry, it seems I have hit a sore spot." He cupped his hands together. "I think it's normal for you to play with female disciples, and it is a basic operation of yours, Hu Fu. But to play with male disciples, I admire you, I really admire you." Qin Yu was overjoyed. He looked at the black-faced Hu Fu, who was shivering in anger. He couldn't wait for Hu Jiming to say a few more words. It would be best if Hu Fu was angered to the point of vomiting 3 liters of blood and fainting. Perhaps he wouldn't even need to do anything to win. That would be perfect. But unfortunately, Hu Fu wasn't so weak. His composure was top-notch. He could even endure someone throwing feces at him. He closed his eyes and opened them again, no longer bothering with the annoying Hu Jiming. His eyes fell on Qin Yu once more. Stand guard. Hu Fu! Let me tell you, the rules of Swallow Run Mountain have been passed down from generation to generation. If you want to break the rules, I, Hu Jiming, will be the first to stop you. He sneered and looked around. Fellow elders, I know you are all watching. It's fine if I remain silent, but I have already jumped out to speak. If you still want to look on helplessly as sect master who breaks the rules and attacks, then although I, Hu Jiming, cannot stop you, I guarantee that I will spread this matter throughout the entire central, desolate, divine continent, so that everyone in the world can carefully see just what sort of appearance this so-called holy land of the Sword Path, Swallow Run Mountain, is. Don't doubt me. I am also called Old Hu, and I always keep my word. If you don't believe me, you can try me. A faint voice echoed out in Qin Yu's ears. Brat, Old Hu, I can only help you to this point. If those old fogies don't care about face, then you can only pray for the best. But no matter what, I hope you can give me a bit so that I can kill that damned Hu Fu. It was Hu Jiming. Qin Yu cupped his hands together from afar. I thank Senior Hu for speaking up for justice. I have returned to my sect's ancestral land and have yet to truly come into contact with it. Fellow Taoists of Swallow Run Mountain, I have only heard from my sect's elders that my Swallow Run Mountain sword cultivators pay the most attention to rules and can be called a model for all cultivators in the world, of course, if you seniors don't care and would rather damage your own image by joining forces with Hu Fu to bully a junior like me, then I can only accept it. Hu Jiming's eyes brightened. Brat, you are quite good. You have a bright future ahead of you. With these words, if Hu Fu could still attack, then those old bastards of Swallow Run Mountain would have their faces stripped clean. Not long after Qin Yu's voice fell, space twisted outside the gates of the heaven-opening sword sect, and the phantoms of several sword peaks appeared. Even though they were only phantoms, they still released a destructive aura that left one's heart racing and filled with despair. Swift and tyrannical, able to cut down all things in the world. Every sword peak shadow represented a true big shot of the Sword Tao, a figure who wielded authority over a part of Swallow Ran Mountain. Hu Fu, wait a moment. Rules must be followed. Sword cultivators of our generation must have self-discipline first. Voices rose up, expressing their stances. Hu Jiming smiled in satisfaction. He cupped his hands towards the crowd and then, without hesitation, turned and flew away, vanishing without a trace. What nonsense, he had achieved his goal. So why didn't he run far away and find a place to hide and watch the live broadcast? Did he want to stay here and wait to be beaten up? Humph, humph, don't forget, his words just now had offended many people. Within the Sword Peak Phantom, several auras chased after the direction that Hu Jiming left. Rumble, rumble, a heaven-shaking sword cry erupted. In the distance, Hu Jiming's roar echoed out. Several big shots. I was just speaking up for the sake of justice. There is no need to vent your anger on me, right? The Sword Peak Phantom fell silent. They hadn't done anything at all. But after being shouted at by Hu Jiming, it was like yellow mud had fallen into their pants. Even if it wasn't shit, it was shit. In the current situation, it really wasn't good to continue attacking him. Otherwise, they would be judged as narrow-minded and narrow-minded. They could only grit their teeth and endure. Of course, this was also because, although Hu Jiming was only a wandering cultivator, his strength was tyrannical. He was one of the more difficult characters to deal with in Swallow Run Mountain. It wasn't easy to deal with him. If one wasn't careful, they would be stained with the stench of urine. Hu Fu was silent. His boiling aura gradually calmed down. He suddenly looked up at Qin Yu. Junior, you are indeed smart. You understand the logic of starting with a single spurt of energy, drying up on the second, and weakening on the third. I have to admit that your clever little tricks worked. I was indeed affected a little. But remember, in the world of sword cultivators, strength will always be number one. No amount of tricks or tricks will ever amount to anything. Hu Fu let out a deep breath. He expressionlessly said, I will kill you. These words were spoken in a light and calm voice. There wasn't the slightest fluctuation in his voice, but everyone could hear the confidence and formidable killing intent contained within this calmness. Qin Yu's heart shrank, but he didn't reveal anything on his face. He looked back at Hu Fu and said, "I also think so." Outside the heaven-splitting sword sect, everyone fell silent. Everyone knew that once the final 2 hours passed, it would be time for the two of them to fight for their lives. Even though Qin Yu hadn't fallen into a disadvantage in a verbal exchange just now, the truth was that no one was optimistic about his chances. After all, Sect Master Hu Fu was the one that everyone had high hopes for. Kill Qin Yu and destroy the heaven-splitting sword sect. Then, everyone would rush forward and eat to their heart's content. This was what it meant to be a happy ending. When there was still a moment until the 2 hours were up, Qin Yu suddenly stood up. His actions caused the complexions of many sword cultivators that had been waiting for the battle to begin to change. And indeed, they heard Qin Yu lightly say, "Hu Fu, I don't want to wait any longer. Take out your sword." "Shameless dog thief, bastard, this is too sudden, and I wasn't prepared at all." Moreover, this little scheme of his couldn't be any more sinister. Hu Fu opened his eyes, his expression calm. Petty tricks will forever remain petty tricks. He lifted his hand, and space shattered. A sword fell into his hand, and he slashed forwards. Apex. Chapter 1703. Their bodies were shaking, but that wasn't necessarily because they were angry. It could be because they wanted to have a stomachache or because they were holding a piece of red-hot iron in their arms. Sect Master Hu Fu was facing the latter situation. A sword was not easy to borrow. The Jin family would not easily hand over their ancestral treasure to him without making any preparations. The Heaven Splitter sword in Hu Fu's hand was in a state of constant heating. After being dragged out for 4 hours by Qin Yu and Hu Jiming, it had become very hot. To be able to endure this without batting an eyelid, Hu Fu's ability to endure could be said to be superb. Thus, what he said before was true. Qin Yu's little tricks had succeeded. Hu Fu had indeed been affected. Although it wasn't much, it was still there. It was also because of this that Hu Fu didn't hide anything when he raised his sword. He didn't want to play a game of cat and mouse. He had used a powerful move to kill Qin Yu and destroy the heaven-splitting sword sect. Heaven Splitter Sword. The expressions of the big shots who had descended from the sword aura in the illusory image of the sword peaks changed. The central, desolate, divine prefecture was vast and had countless sword cultivators. But as the peak figures of this Tao, they were naturally familiar with the top immortal swords of the world. They could recognize at a glance that the immortal sword in Hu Fu's hand was the Heaven Splitter sword of the Jin family. Its aura could not be faked. This caused the elders of Swallow Mountain to frown. The influence of a sword Tao family could be compared to the 10 sword sects. Now, they had publicly interfered in the matters of the heaven-splitting sword sect. It seemed like it was because Jin Gung had almost been killed, but who could guarantee that there were no other secrets? The Jin family and the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect joining hands was a power that could not be underestimated. They had the qualifications to change the situation of Swallow Mountain. These great figures had been in high positions for a long time. A single thought could affect countless things. They instantly made a series of connections and guesses. As for the heaven-splitting sword sect, when Hu Fu unhesitatingly summoned the Heaven Splitter sword, everything was decided. With his sword Tao realm and the support of the immortal sword, he could even fight an Emperor realm expert. A pseudo-little world seemed invincible against anyone below the Emperor realm, but Hu Fu could cut it apart with a single slash. How could Qin Yu resist? They had already begun to consider what would happen after the heaven-splitting sword sect was destroyed. How could they obtain more benefits in the upcoming turmoil? Qin Yu had drawn his sword. Strictly speaking, he and Hu Fu should have drawn their swords at the same time, but it was clear that Qin Yu's eruption of power was inferior to that of others. In addition, almost everyone's attention was focused on Hu Fu, so no one paid any attention to him when he attacked. Or, even if someone saw it, they wouldn't care. For example, in the case of a mantis trying to stop a chariot, would anyone care if that unlucky mantis raised its hand? Obviously, this was not important. But soon, no one thought that way, because Qin Yu slashed out with his sword, and it collided with the heaven-splitting sword. It was as if two stars above the 9 heavens had suddenly collided without any warning while rotating at high speed. An earth-shattering explosion was accompanied by an almost unimaginably terrifying aura that swept out in all directions. In an instant, the world around the two of them shattered, and everything turned into nothingness. Time, space, and all laws and scales were reduced to dust. A few sword mountain phantoms let out low roars at the same time. The sword aura descended here, and the big shots of the way of the sword attacked without hesitation. Bang, bang, bang. Dreadful sword intent arrived, forming layers of seals and shackles that forcefully locked in the fluctuations caused by the collision of the two swords. If they were allowed to continue spreading, there would surely be serious casualties outside the heaven-splitting sword sect. And many of these sword cultivators were the disciples of their respective sections. This sudden change left the countless sword cultivators watching the battle stunned. After a moment of shock, their faces paled and cold sweat dripped down their foreheads. They felt their legs shiver. Just a little bit more. If it weren't for the several seniors helping out, they would have died just now. This thought constantly lingered in the hearts of the sword cultivators, leaving them in a trance. They felt this was unbelievable and unreal. Qin Yu, how could he be so strong? The one he faced was sect master Hu Fu, and he also had that terrifying immortal sword in his hand, but whether they believed it or not, this was the truth. Not only had Qin Yu blocked Hu Fu's sword, but the shockwaves had nearly reaped all of them. As everyone looked at the chaotic and destroyed battlefield, they subconsciously revealed a look of awe. Who would have thought that the successor of the heaven-splitting sword sect would have hidden his strength so deeply? The elders of Swallow Mountain sword sect that joined forces to block the shockwaves of the sword touch all had dignified expressions. Although they hadn't participated in the battle, they could clearly feel the strength released by Qin Yu and Hu Fu's swords. They felt that their sense of self had been severely challenged. He was clearly just a junior at the ruler realm. Even if he had cultivated the heaven-opening sword art and was able to descend into a small world, that was enough to be considered a stunning talent. So what? Swallow Mountain never lacked true geniuses of the sword. Otherwise, Zhang Sheshan wouldn't have lost an arm in the past and lived to this day as a wandering cultivator. Geniuses and powerhouses were two completely different concepts. At this moment, whether they wanted to admit it or not, the elders of Swallow Mountain had no choice but to raise Qin Yu's status to the same level as them, or even higher. This was because they asked themselves if the target of this sword strike was any one of them. None of them would have been able to escape unscathed. Sword cultivators were number one in terms of killing power, much less two peak existences that could fight emperors. This sword strike contained its strongest killing intent. Everything was destroyed. There was nothing but chaos in front of everyone, as if the world hadn't been formed yet. It was impossible to clearly see what was happening inside. But at this moment, everyone had a clear intuition that the outcome of the battle between the two sides had already been decided by this single sword strike. Because it was far too quiet. After the first sword strike, neither side attacked again. As for Qin Yu and Hu Fu, it was clear that there was no possibility of them making peace. And victory and defeat meant life and death. Two peerless sword cultivators had decided life and death with a single sword strike. Even in Swallow Mountain, this sort of matter hadn't occurred for many years. The sword cultivators never imagined that they would see such a tragic and heroic scene today. Everyone held their breaths and stared at the seals formed by the elders of the sword, waiting for the truth to come to light. At this time, the entire Swallow Mountain was deathly silent. It wasn't just the sword cultivators, but even the monster beasts hiding in the mountains were lying on the ground, not daring to move. even though in their hearts they wished that those damned sword cultivators would all die one by one. Time passed, and under the effect of the eternal and everlasting attribute that heaven and earth possessed, the destroyed parts began to be reconstructed. The most direct observation was that the area that had been shattered into primal chaos was beginning to reform bit by bit. It gave off a feeling like the thick fog that covered them was constantly dissipating, and their vision gradually became clear. Pairs of eyes widened as they stared at the scene in front of them. Finally, they saw two figures in the fog, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left was Sect Master Hufu. He was relatively tall, and it was easy to recognize him. Everyone relaxed and subconsciously let out a breath of relief. This was because Sect Master Hufu's back was straight and he was motionless, holding his immortal sword. Deep and lofty, this was the style of the sword sect. Across from him, Qin Yu was half kneeling on the ground, his sword nowhere to be seen. It was already clear what the result would be. The sudden rise of the heaven-splitting sword sect wasn't in line with the interests of the sword cultivators. Moreover, it was in human nature to instinctively reject strangers that suddenly appeared, especially if they were strong enough to make them despair and able to control their life or death. This could be simply understood as a deep-rooted bad habit, and Hufu's victory was in line with everyone's interests and also in line with their expectations. This was because Hufu was strong to begin with and was a great figure of Swallow Mountain. With the immortal sword in his hand, it was natural for him to be the final victor. The impact of the sword touch finally faded away, and the sword intent that sealed the world faded away. Space twisted and figures appeared in the skies above the heaven-splitting sword sect. Among them were Sect Master Gu and Li Sumu, who had been bestowed swords. The former held his hands behind his back, his expression calm and indifferent, as if everything in front of him was nothing but fleeting clouds. As for Li Sumu, he couldn't help but frown. He looked towards the battlefield, his eyes filled with mystery. "Greetings, Sect Master." "Disciple greets old ancestor." "Greetings, Sword Master." The many sword cultivators below all fell to their knees. No one paid any attention to them. They looked down at the two figures that had appeared on the battlefield. One of them suddenly sighed. He said in a soft voice, "Everyone, let's go congratulate the heaven-splitting sword sect for reopening their gates today." His voice wasn't loud, but in this quiet environment it still spread through the surroundings. Countless sword cultivators froze in place. In the next moment, they disregarded their manners and looked up at the several big shots above them, their faces filled with shock and horror. Did they hear wrong? Of course, several people landed outside the gates. They cupped their hands together and said, "Congratulations, Sect Master Qin Yu. Today, you have revived the heaven-splitting sword sect and continued its inheritance." Cough, cough, cough. With a series of coughing sounds, the half-kneeling Qin Yu stood up with difficulty. There was no wound on his body, and his complexion was incomparably pale. He covered his mouth, revealing mottled red spots between his fingers. Across from him, the motionless Hufu suddenly fell to the ground. Whoosh! The heaven-splitting sword in his hand shot into the skies and vanished from sight. This occurred in front of everyone, but no one tried to intercept the heaven-splitting sword. It wasn't easy to take something from the Jin family. Moreover, at this time, they weren't in the mood to stir up trouble. Hufu had died. Although they had already expected this, they still found it hard to believe when they saw this. Thus, as they looked at Qin Yu, they subconsciously had a complex look in their eyes. Even now, the big shots couldn't figure out why Qin Yu had been able to kill Hufu with a single sword strike. This didn't make sense. The greatest possibility was that the sword that Qin Yu had slashed out had disappeared. As they thought back to the changes in the sword spirit aura they sensed in the heaven-splitting sword sect, a thoughtful look appeared in everyone's eyes. Cough, 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 cough. My apologies. This is my first time meeting with everyone in such a distressed state. But The facts have proven that cleverness is useful. Otherwise, the one standing here right now would likely be Sect Master Hufu. Qin Yu let go and placed his hands behind his back. His expression was calm, and there was even a smile on his lips. Let's not speak too much. Today is the first day we open the sect gates, and there are many things to do. Moreover, my sect has indeed suffered heavy injuries, so I won't keep seniors here any longer. He paused for a moment and continued to say, Sect Master Gu, I am a man of my word. Once I recover from my injuries, the first thing I will do is visit the sword forging faction and then the spring wind sword sect. I must thank Brotherly for showing mercy and not forcing me to reveal my cards ahead of time. His words were light and breezy, his expression calm and unruffled. He didn't try to hide anything at all. In his current injured state, he seemed open and honest. But it was clear that the big shots of Swallow Mountain weren't shaken by this. A powerful immortal sword that could jump ranks to fight, and one that had even likely fused a sword spirit into it. That could be considered a true immortal artifact. If they could get their hands on it, they would instantly become the uncrowned kings of Yanran Mountain. This was a great temptation. So great that even the big shots of sword cultivators hesitated on whether or not to directly tear off their masks. It was indeed terrible to have their reputation ruined. But if they could obtain an immortal artifact that could raise their cultivation by a level, then that didn't seem important at all. History was always written by the victors. As long as one was strong enough, then no matter how dirty or despicable the events of today were, they could all be buried in the endless river of time like dust. Completely unremarkable. Sect Master Gu nodded. He lightly said, very good. I will wait for you to discuss the sword. He was still full of arrogance. Li Sumu hesitated for a moment. I will wait for you to come and have a true battle. This was his stance. The two of them withdrew from today's matters and wouldn't interfere. But they also wouldn't stand up for the heaven-splitting sword sect. This was because the world of cultivators was dark to begin with. If one wanted to survive, not only did they need strength, but they also needed good luck. Everyone else remained silent, including the first person who had spoken up and expressed his desire to congratulate the heaven-splitting sword sect. They were hesitating. This was because there was more than one person in the heaven-splitting sword sect. Qin Yu was someone from the inheritance sect, and the woman beside him was without a doubt his Tao protector. These past several days were more than enough time for them to thoroughly investigate everything that had happened since Qin Yu and Li Sumu entered Swallow Mountain. Qin Yu was already so strong to an unimaginable degree. So, what about that woman's Tao protector? Although she hadn't done anything since the heaven-splitting sword sect reopened, no one dared to determine just what boundary she had reached. If they took a risk, they might be able to seize the immortal artifact, but there was also a chance they might break their teeth and break their heads. Qin Yu began to cough again. His complexion was incomparably pale. He lifted a hand to cover his mouth. Finally, blood began to drip down from between his fingers. This blood was like some sort of temptation, causing the eyes of the several silent people to darken. Qin Yu took a deep breath and shook his head. Little meat, I have already seen everything clearly. Bring me back to recuperate. Little meat? Who was he calling? The heaven-splitting sword sect's Tao protector actually had such a strange name? Shua. Little Meat's figure appeared out of thin air beside Qin Yu. She looked at his pale complexion and his hands that were stained with blood. I allowed you to look a little longer because I wanted you to remember that you can be a sword cultivator in the future, but you should never consider yourself a sword cultivator. This is because they are indeed a group of extremely loathsome people. Li Sumu furrowed his eyebrows. Little Meat glanced at him. Do you dare to say that you weren't tempted at all before? Li Sumu had no expression. Yes, but I scrupulously abide by my own bottom line. Little Meat coldly sneered. I hope you can continue to persist. She turned and swept her eyes over the crowd. Why haven't you scrammed out yet? Are you waiting for me to invite you to stay for a meal? Sect Master Gu was the first to turn. Don't forget to visit me. He floated away, his clothes fluttering in the wind. He had the demeanor of a great expert. It was just that upon closer inspection, this back seemed a bit urgent. Li Sumu rose up from the ground and howled into the skies. Cough! Miss Little Meat has misunderstood. I will visit another day. Farewell. Sect Master Qin, please rest and recover from your injuries. Just now, if anyone dared to act recklessly, I would be the first to object. With these words, this person turned and left. In order to protect their face, the big shots left one after another. Then, the silent sword cultivators all left with complex expressions. When they retreated a certain distance, they couldn't help but turn their heads and look at the distant stone tablet, Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. They only felt that these 4 large words that were covered in cuts and moss were now filled with a silent pressure. Today, the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had reopened its gates, and Sect Master Qinyu had cut down Hufu. Although the Tao Protector Little Meat hadn't done anything, with just a few words he had forced all the big shots away. How could he be someone easy to deal with? Everyone knew that after today there would be another Colossus added to Swallow Mountain. Perhaps the heavens would truly change. The Peak. Chapter 1704. Some people only looked pale and didn't seem to have any wounds on the surface. But in truth, their organs had been severely wounded, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that their bodies were riddled with holes. For instance, Qinyu. He had used the mountain and river sword to cut down Hufu in a single strike. Although it seemed simple and clean, the words he had said before had left him some face. It wasn't that his injuries weren't light at all, but that they were very, very heavy. So heavy that he could only lay on his bed and groan. Qin, you also wanted to endure it. In front of Little Meaty and the new disciples, he wanted to display his unyielding and dignified side. But this was something he couldn't endure at all. It was similar to when you had to groan a few times. The old sword cultivator tightly held onto his immortal sword. His face was still flushed red, and he would occasionally look up at the young sect master lying across from him. It was said that when one's luck changed, one could ascend to the heavens with a single step. He never thought that at his age, with his neck buried in the earth, he would actually have a chance to turn things around. The one-armed hero, Zhang Xiashan, lowered his head and fell silent. Little Meaty looked at the two of them. From today onwards, you are people of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. The sect master, and I don't have time to manage the trivial matters of the sect. Go and accept some disciples and clean up the sect first. The old sword cultivator respectfully nodded. Those who had suffered the cruel beating of reality would always cherish everything in front of them. Zhang Xiashan silently followed behind. He still hadn't completely reversed his attitude. For instance, he had clearly come to the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect to ask about swords. So how had he suddenly become a disciple of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect? And what did he say about his severed arm? Everyone else thought that Zhang Xiashan had lost an arm in order to reach his current boundary. But they had no idea just how much suffering he had suffered to reach this step because of his severed arm. But Zhang Xiashan didn't dare to resist. Little Meaty glanced at him, and that gaze caused him to give up on any thoughts of resisting. After the two left, Little Meaty turned around. Isn't this shameful? Qin Yu bitterly smiled and nodded. This was the truth. He had to accept it. He turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. Only then did he feel his heavy chest relax a little. Little Meaty frowned. She walked over and flicked her sleeves. An invisible strength wrapped around Qin Yu. She turned and walked deeper into the sect. Her feet weren't fast, but the scenery on both sides seemed to take the initiative to fly backwards. After several breaths of time, a stone wall appeared in front of her. Little Meaty flicked her sleeves, and ripples appeared in the stone walls. She brought Qin Yu directly in. There was a distortion in front of him. When his vision recovered, he discovered that he was atop a verdant sword peak. The silver moon hung high above his head, but it was still daytime just now. Before Qin Yu could think any further, the sword peak suddenly became lively, with loud squeaking sounds. The branches of the towering trees swayed about. There seemed to be something, a lot of them, rushing towards the mountain top. Qin Yu glanced at Meaty. Seeing her calm expression, he didn't think much of it. Very soon, they arrived at their destination. Monkey. All over the mountains, on the treetops, on the branches, in the bushes, there were heads peeking out, looking at the two uninvited guests in front of them. These monkeys were covered in silvery white fur. Under the moonlight, ripples of light could be seen on their fur. A crafty light shined in their eyes. Little Meaty stretched out a hand. With the sound of breaking air, a silver-furred monkey scurried to her feet. It carefully placed its head against her palm, rubbed it twice, and then opened its mouth to cry out in excitement. The monkey horde immediately stirred. Little Meaty coldly snorted. They immediately quieted down and lowered their heads, revealing respectful expressions. Bring Qin Yu up to recuperate from his injuries. From now on, you must all listen to what he says. The monkeys nodded repeatedly. Qin Yu opened his mouth. Little Meaty lightly said, "Once your injuries are healed, the 9 heavenly bends within your body will begin to stabilize. At that time, I will pass on a new cultivation method to you." Qin Yu's eyes brightened. Little Meaty stepped away and placed Qin Yu down. After obtaining permission, the monkey horde hopped over and lifted him up as they rushed towards the mountain peak. These were definitely not ordinary monkeys. Their strength was astonishing and their speed even more so. Qin Yu felt dizzy from being tossed around. By the time the monkey horde stopped, they had already arrived at the mountain peak. In front of him was a pool of water that seemed to be formed from the convergence of moonlight. It was silvery white and dazzling. It was nearly the same as the fur of these monkeys. The monkey horde squeaked several times. Then, with a sudden burst of strength, they threw Qin Yu into the pool. Bang! Immediately, water splashed in all directions. When the Heaven Splitter's sword left Swallow Mountain, it circled around and brought Jin Geng back to the Jin family. Then it tossed him in front of the ancestral temple and flashed inside. Jin Geng struggled up and knelt in front of the ancestral temple. He still couldn't figure out how Qin Yu could be so formidable. Hu Fu held the Heaven Splitter sword in his hand, but he had still been cut down by a single sword strike. Perhaps only a true sovereign could accomplish this. As Qin Yu's figure appeared in his mind, Jin Geng shivered. He didn't want to admit it, but without a doubt, deep in his heart, he had been branded with a mark of fear. The only good news was that this time his own guilt wasn't too great. This was because Qin Yu was far too strong, so strong that it was impossible for him to win. So, this time, the old ancestor should give him another chance. After all, this could be considered a mistake in the family's decision-making that led to this situation. Jin Geng had already faintly sensed that the Jin family had made some arrangements in Swallow Mountain. This included allowing him to go to the entrance of the heaven-splitting sword sect to seek an opportunity to capture the sword spirit. Quietly, the ancestral temple doors opened and the old ancestor walked out. Jin Geng hurriedly fell to his knees. Jin Geng greets the old ancestor. The old ancestor glanced at him and coldly said, "Jin Geng, if you cannot remove the mark of fear in your heart, it will be difficult for you to accomplish anything in your life." Jin Geng's forehead was instantly covered with a cold sweat. This grandson understands. What happened at Swallow Mountain wasn't your fault. Go to the sword, quenching pagoda, and cultivate for a month. If you can restore your boundary, I will give you another chance. Jin Geng was overjoyed. He kowtowed. "Thank you, old ancestor. Western Wasteland, Thousand Islands County, Long Island." Old Masterman was fishing with a fishing pole. The old chef was busy breaking down the freshly caught fish to make a good fish soup. The old master loved to drink this soup. The girl, with a big braid, stood beside her father. She was making noodles on another chopping board. Young Masterman didn't have a good appetite recently. It was better to eat something soft. The fishing line suddenly sank. Old Masterman's hand shook, and a big fish splashed out of the water. The bamboo basket was just right. He put the big fish in, and then he removed the hook nimbly. His movements were smooth. Old Masterman, you have excellent fishing skills. Go Sheng smiled and flattered without hesitation. The third generation of the Li family, who used to be indifferent and serious, had obviously changed during the time he was recovering in Changdao. Old Masterman glanced at him. Say it if you have something to say. He was annoyed by this bastard. If it weren't for the fact that Madame was so scary, he would have slapped him into pieces. Goshen grinned. Old Masterman, I feel that my injury is almost healed. It's time to go. Old Masterman sneered. I let you stay? If you want to leave, get out of here. What are you talking to me about? Goshen coughed softly. Here's the situation. My natal sword was destroyed. Before Madame left, she said that you would give me a new one. Min Changjing's eyes widened. Bulsh *T. How come I didn't know that? Goshen reminded him in a low voice. Old Masterman, you are scolding my madam. Min Changjing's face changed slightly. He looked around and didn't notice anything wrong. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. But he felt that what he did just now was a bit shameful, so his face turned even darker. Goshen thought for a moment and said, I know that old Masterman doesn't like me around. I'm an eyesore. Just give me a bone and send me away so that you won't be annoyed. What do you think? This was the way out. Min Changjing's face softened. He glanced at him and hesitated. After thinking for a while, he snorted. I really have a sword here. If you can get it, it's yours. As he said this, he took out a sword and threw it into the water. Goshen froze for a moment, then rushed out and hit the water with a splash. After a few breaths, Min Changjing suddenly raised his eyebrows. Bang! With a muffled sound, the water surface exploded and Goshen rushed out. He held the sword and bowed, respectfully. Thank you for the reward, old master. I will take my leave now. Swoosh! A sword cry erupted, soaring into the sky and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Since he had obtained something, he naturally had to leave. If Min Changjing went back on his word, would he dare to take it back? Old Chef wiped his hands and walked over. Old master, why did you give him this sword? Min Changjing's lips twitched. Do you think I was willing to give it to him? Old Chef realized that he had said something wrong. He revealed an awkward expression and quickly raised his hand, slapping himself in the face. Cough! Old Masterman, how could I understand your farsightedness? The fish soup is almost ready. I'll go and get you a bowl. He turned and left. Min Changjing rubbed his chin. He looked in the direction Goshen left, a trace of confusion in his eyes. Just now he had only taken out that sword because of a sudden thought. That bastard, he had actually obtained it. This didn't make sense, but it had happened. It was probably fate. The sword was definitely a good sword. He, Min Changjing, never kept trash in his hands. But to bring it back to the central, desolate, humph, if he wasn't careful, there would be problems. There would definitely be problems, big or small. But what did that have to do with him? If you want to rip me off, then I'll give you a good sword that no one can find fault with. If you cause a disturbance, then that's because you used it inappropriately. Moreover, there might even be a chance to trick some of his old friends from the past. Thinking of this, Min Changjing smiled, his gloominess disappearing. He only felt that giving away the sword was the right choice. There was only a silver moon atop the mountain peak. On the second day Chinyu arrived here, he learned that this sword peak was a special, mystic realm. His injuries healed extremely quickly. The silver water in the pool contained a powerful vitality and also had the effect of stabilizing the great Tao. When Chinyu was repairing the damage within his body, it was just as Midi had said. the 9 bends heaven-span great Tao, was completely unstable. It was only at this moment that Qin Yu suddenly understood. The 9 bends heaven-span great Tao had truly become something he had. Before this, it had only been an empty frame. Although it seemed grand and beautiful, it could actually shatter and collapse at any moment. Now he could feel his keen perception of the outside world, as well as the special state where he was suppressed and coexisted with the world. Qin Yu closed his eyes, feeling that this was extremely mysterious. Shua, Midi appeared at the edge of the pool. She looked at him and said, "Don't lose yourself in it. If you stay too long, you might not wake up." He was startled. The mysterious feeling from before instantly faded away like a tide. Qin Yu opened his eyes. He looked at Midi, a dignified expression on his face. He felt that there was a great horror hidden within her words. Midi didn't explain too much. There were some things that could only be truly understood after experiencing them for themselves. Today, I will pass on to you a cultivation method, also known as the heretical path. Efficiency comes first and nothing else matters. The advantage is that it will allow you to complete the accumulations needed to attack the threshold of Deva in the shortest period of time. The disadvantage is that your cultivation foundation will be unstable, and there will be many troubles in the future. You will need to spend more energy and methods to eliminate them. Midi had already mentioned this before, so Qin Yu was already mentally prepared. He nodded without hesitation. As for the future, let's talk about it later. If there were gains, there were losses. He had to survive first and worry about troubles later. Chapter 1705. The process of little Midi passing down the cultivation method was simple. She lifted a hand and placed it between Qin Yu's eyebrows, paused for a moment, and then took it back. Besides receiving the extreme yin and extreme yang sword arts inheritances in his soul space, this was the first time that Qin Yu had truly come into contact with a soul transmission technique. In his mind, countless memories instantly exploded. Not only were there words and pictures, but there were also many blurry figures that were demonstrating the technique. They directly fused into Qin Yu's memories, becoming a part of him. It was like he had already cultivated this technique for many years, without the slightest feeling of strangeness. A heretical path, this was little Midi's mouth. This so-called heretical path, Qin Yu only felt that it was incomparably exquisite. Every part of it was strange, but it actually matched with the road of cultivation. This was clearly a magnificent and unfathomable top-notch cultivation method. Even if it contained hidden dangers that could cause one's foundation to be unstable, the existence that created this cultivation method was worthy of the name of a grand scholar. After an unknown period of time, Qin Yu felt that he had digested some of this information. He let out a long breath and slowly opened his eyes. He looked at little Midi, who was standing by the pool with her hands behind her back, her temperament as faint as that of an immortal. He impatiently asked, "What is the name of this cultivation method?" Little Midi furrowed her eyebrows. She thought for a moment and said, "I forgot. If you want, you can call it the Toad Art." Toad Art! Qin Yu felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes widened as he looked at the calm little Midi. It was hard to imagine that he would hear such a careless answer from her mouth. Blasphemy. This was naked blasphemy. Huh. Little Midi coldly sneered. "You don't think that this sort of trash like the Toad Art is already very good, do you? How laughable. If it weren't for the fact that time was tight, you wouldn't have been able to steadily advance. I have 100 cultivation methods that are more suitable for you to cultivate." The anger in Qin Yu's heart was extinguished by a bucket of cold water. He rubbed his face and forced a smile. "The Toad Art is the Toad Art. The cultivation method you gave me is up to you." Little Midi said, "Cultivate well. Although you have the Toad Art, if you don't want to die an ugly death in the future, you must work even harder. Moreover, you have already tasted the sweetness of the book that Jiang Huan left behind. But let me tell you, What you obtained isn't even the slightest bit. Let's go. You can continue cultivating inside." As soon as she finished speaking, she took a step forward and disappeared. Entering and exiting the secret realm of the Sword Mountain was so easy and casual for her body. This was already the third time Little Meaty had reminded him about the book Jiang Huan had left behind. It looked like he needed to pay more attention to it. "Qin," you secretly warned himself. He took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. There was a look of anticipation on his face. He had already learned the toting skill, but he didn't know how effective it would be. He closed his eyes, and a picture scroll appeared in his mind. Qin Yu was sitting cross-legged in the pool, the faint ripples of the water rippling. On this day, the heaven-splitting sword sect once again attracted the attention of the entire Swallow Ran Mountain. The countless stars in the night sky suddenly lit up, sprinkling down countless rays of starlight. Guided by an invisible force, they gathered at the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect's main gate, forming pillars. That night, on the various sword peaks, the big shots of the sword Dao did not sleep. Their eyes were like lightning as they stared at the pillars of starlight. Their complexions were solemn and dignified, shock visible in their eyes. With the big shot's cultivation and vision, they could guess that the starlight descending from the heaven-splitting sword sect was caused by a person's cultivation. However, they could not figure out what kind of realm or cultivation method it was that could cause such a scene that was almost like a worldly phenomenon. Was it Qin Yu, or was it that unfathomable Tao protector? But no matter who it was, any one of them was like a giant stone pressing down on their already heavy hearts. It was only at dawn that the stars in the skies faded away and the pillars of starlight gradually faded away. Sword Mountain Mystic Realm. Qin Yu opened his eyes, a sharp light surging within them. A smile lifted the corners of his lips. Toting skill. Although this name had been ruined by Little Meaty, the effects were truly amazing. The amount of heaven and earth spiritual strength he absorbed in a single cultivation session was comparable to what he had absorbed in the past. He continued cultivating for several days without end. In particular, this heaven and earth spiritual strength was incomparably pure. After it fused into his body, Qin Yu felt his connection with the world become much closer. This wasn't an illusion on Qin Yu's part. This was because the power of starlight was the purest strength in the world. After absorbing it and fusing it into his body, he could naturally deepen his connection with the world. This was helpful in strengthening and perfecting his small world. It was just that the attribute of the heaven and earth spiritual strength he absorbed just now had suddenly changed. It had gone from cool and quiet to burning hot. Qin Yu was worried that there would be a problem, so he stopped cultivating. After the pleasant surprise passed, he carefully sensed his body but didn't feel anything wrong. He looked up at the sword peak, at the silver moon that rose in the east and set in the west, a thoughtful look on his face. Although he hadn't seen the phenomenon in the outside world, Qin Yu knew the principles behind the toting skill. To absorb the essence of the sun and moon for one's own use was an extremely powerful cultivation method. The change in the attribute of absorbing the heaven and earth spiritual strength just now should have been a change in the outside world. Thinking about it, Qin Yu didn't continue cultivating. He stood up and left the pool at the summit. With a thought, his clothes became dry. It was only then that he discovered that the summit was filled with monkeys. All of them opened their eyes, looking at him with sorrow and dissatisfaction. To be stared at by a group of monkeys like this, no matter how firm Qin Yu's mind was, he still felt his hairs stand on end. Luckily, sorrow was sorrow and dissatisfaction was dissatisfaction. As the monkeys saw that Qin Yu was full of energy and his injuries had nearly recovered, they didn't dare to be presumptuous. They turned and ran away, vanishing without a trace. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Qin Yu felt that their fur was much brighter than before. Could it be that they were also benefiting from cultivating? He shook his head and suppressed these thoughts. Qin Yu thought for a moment and then reached out a hand. There was an awkward silence. Scratching his head, Chinyu coughed. "Little meaty, let me out." Just as his voice fell, his vision blurred. In the next moment he appeared in a grand hall. It was clear that this place was newly built. The air was filled with the fragrance of wood that couldn't be dispersed. Little Meaty lazily leaned against a soft couch. Her eyes fell on Chinyu. "Not bad. The toad art suits you quite well." Although Chinyu knew that her words should be praise, he still couldn't help but twitch his lips. Pretending not to hear anything, he walked to the window. Outside, he could see the bustling scene of construction. Buildings rose up from the ground one after another. In just several days, the current heaven-splitting sword sect no longer showed any signs of its past dilapidated state. Instead, it was filled with vitality. Outside the hall, a respectful voice sounded out. "Great Elder, Ironwood requests an audience." Little Meaty looked up. She sat up straight and said, "Come in." The old sword cultivator hurried in. Just like the heaven-splitting sword sect master, his aura had greatly changed. His face was ruddy and his eyes were bright. He had changed into a new set of robes, and it was as if he were two different people. Seeing Chinyu, the old sword cultivator was startled. He hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, sect master." "Congratulations, sect master. You have left seclusion." Although it was hurried, his tone was respectful. Chinyu nodded. "Stand up. You came too. Great Elder. Let's discuss business first." "Yes." The old sword cultivator's surname was Ironwood. He had come to look for Little Meaty because he had reported that there were many sword cultivators outside that were requesting to join the heaven-splitting sword sect. Little Meaty yawned. She waved her hand and said, "For such matters, your sect master has come. Look for him." The old sword cultivator didn't dare to say no. He pitifully turned around. Chinyu thought for a moment. "Reject them first. Say that the sect isn't ready yet, so we won't be accepting disciples for now." One didn't need to be a genius to know that these sword cultivators outside were definitely filled with sand. If they were really recruited, the heaven-splitting sword sect would be thoroughly infiltrated by them. The old sword cultivator respectfully bowed. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back down. He bowed and bid his farewells. Chinyu said, "What do you want to say?" The old sword cultivator was frightened. His face flushed red, and he waved his hands again and again as if he were frightened. Chinyu arched an eyebrow. "Think carefully. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it in the future." The old sword cultivator clenched his teeth and fell to his knees. This disciple does have something to say. Right now, there are very few disciples in the sect. I wonder if it is possible to recruit some young sword cultivators from my hometown? I don't ask that they enter the sect, but even some odd jobs are fine. As he finished speaking, he kowtowed again and again. This disciple understands. I was given an inch and wanted a foot. I ask sect master to forgive me. Chinyu thought for a moment. Since our heaven-splitting sword sect has reopened its doors, we certainly can't remain like this. Only by increasing the number of disciples can we have the atmosphere of a sect. Ironwood, you can recruit some people from your hometown. If their talent is good, they can enter the sword sect to cultivate. Otherwise, as you said, they can only be odd jobs. The old sword cultivator's eyes turned red. He kowtowed several more times, his lips trembling. He was so excited that he couldn't speak. "Thank you, sect master. Thank you, sect master." He repeated this over and over again. Only he knew what Chinyu's words meant to a small and unremarkable sword cultivator family in a remote land. Without accident, their Ironwood family would step onto the road of prosperity because of this. What this would change was the fate of their entire family, as well as the future and prospects of their descendants. How could he not be excited? After speaking a few more words, he confirmed that the old sword cultivator would personally return to his hometown and bring the most outstanding juniors back to Swallow Mountain. Only then did he excitedly leave. Little Meaty didn't have any interest in hearing this. She leaned back on a soft couch. Sir Chin, your methods of winning over people are quite good. I think that in the future, even if you told him to die, he wouldn't hesitate in the least. Chin Yu said, I didn't think too much about it. The Heaven-Splitting Sword sect will eventually have to recruit disciples. Rather than recruiting some unknown people in Swallow Mountain, it would be better to take advantage of the situation and agree. He paused for a moment and continued to say, the sword sect has just opened and there are countless things that need to be done. With Ironwood's intelligence, it's impossible for him to not think of this. Even so, he didn't hesitate at all and took the initiative to return to his hometown to lead people. At the very least, his character isn't bad. Little Meaty curled her lips. After saying so much, I still think he's pleasing to the eye, so I tried to win him over. Men are all hypocrites. Chin Yu rubbed his nose. Let's talk business. He turned and sat down. When I cultivate, I absorb the essence of the sun and moon for my own use. Is this beneficial to cultivating the extreme yin and extreme yang sword arts? Little Meaty nodded. You're smart. You noticed it so quickly. It really was like this. Chapter 1706. The toting art's cultivation efficiency was indescribable. But not long after Chin Yu opened it for the second time, he stopped. There was no other reason. This was far too great a disturbance. Silently developing was the way to go. If he did this, sooner or later there would be a problem. Scratching his head, Chin Yu stood up and went to look for Little Meaty. She was sleeping, and after being woken up by Chin Yu, she was clearly in a bad mood. Her eyes widened as she stared at Chin Yu. Are you using your small world as a decoration? Her words seemed to awaken him from his dreams. Chin Yu slapped his forehead. That's right, I was confused. I can use my small world to counteract this phenomenon. My flesh is truly fierce. Little Meaty pointed a finger. Stop flattering me. If you have nothing to say, then hurry up and leave. Chin Yu smiled. All right, you can continue sleeping. Although he had found a direction, there were still some problems in implementing it. For instance, when his small world descended and interfered with the gathering of the sun and moon essence, how could he do this quietly and without affecting the efficiency of the absorption? Chin Yu tried for several days before he gradually found a path. He used his own small world to hide the beams of starlight. This wasn't a problem during the day. The 9 suns shined down in all directions. If one didn't look carefully, it would be hard to notice. After several more days, Chin Yu stopped cultivating. He felt as if he had eaten too much and his chest felt heavy and stifled. This was one of the minor drawbacks of the toting art. If one absorbed a massive amount of heaven and earth spiritual strength too quickly, it would cause one to experience indigestion. During the cultivation process, one had to stop for a day or two and allow the body to gradually absorb it. If one continued to cultivate like this, not only would the efficiency decrease, but it might also cause harm to one's body. In the end, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. After several days of seclusion, the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect had a new atmosphere. When cultivators did things, they were always extremely efficient. Moreover, this was just rebuilding the sect, something that didn't require much skill. There were large stretches of buildings. Although there weren't any signs of human habitation, at first glance, it did indeed have the atmosphere of a large sect. This time, Chin Yu didn't come to visit. The first self-proclaimed great elder of the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect appeared in front of him. Since you won't cultivate today, then fulfill your promise and visit your neighbors in Swallow Mountain. This didn't seem like something Meaty would say. Chin Yu glanced at her, surprise in his eyes. He thought for a moment and said, Meaty, it can't be that simple, right? Little Meat said indifferently, You came to visit as a guest and brought a gift. It's normal for the host to be a bit more enthusiastic and give you some gifts in return. He returned the gesture, circled the key points. Indeed, there was something. Chin Yu thought for a moment. Does the sword forging faction have something I need? Little Meaty nodded. Though the forging of the mountain and river sword has been completed, the sword embryo is still too rough. We need to find a sufficiently high-quality whetstone, and only after polishing will it be able to display its full brilliance. Needless to say, this sentence was enough. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. I will go to the sword forging faction today. No one in this world was clearer than him about the might of the mountain river sword. To be able to let it display its sharpness without mentioning anything else. Just these 4 words alone were worth a trip. However, Little Meat, since the whetstone you mentioned can increase the power of the mountain river sword, it should be quite valuable, right? Little Meaty's expression was calm. The mountain river sword was refined by me. His words were filled with pride. He also expressed his attitude. Qin Yu rubbed his brows. Since it's like this, I'm afraid the sword forging faction won't agree so easily. This was a very tactful way of putting it. You went to their house and coveted their treasure. It would be good if you weren't beaten out. What was there to say about visiting as a guest? Little Meat raised her eyebrows. Of course I'm prepared. Zhang Xiashan was very unwilling to do the work of running errands. But now in Yen Ran Mountain, the famous heaven-splitting sword sect, other than the sect master and the great elder, only had 2 official disciples, Tai Lin and him. The old sword cultivator could not wait any longer. He had already left several days ago to return to his hometown to select disciples for the sect. He was the only one left to handle the matter. He had to go even if he did not want to. Little Meat glanced at him. Her expression was so calm that he could not see any emotion. But for some reason he was very flustered. The sword forging faction. After Zhang Xiashan revealed his identity, he received a warm reception. An elder personally spoke to him. Coincidentally, many years ago, at a gathering of wandering cultivators on Yen Ran Mountain, Zhang Xiashan had once seen this sword forging faction elder. At that time, this elder had a noble status, and he was just an unremarkable little sword cultivator. The 2 of them had not spoken at all. The sword forging faction elder had only appeared for a moment before leaving. This caused the host of the gathering to feel proud, and everyone was excited. Afterwards, although Zhang Xiashan became increasingly famous and became one of the more famous wandering cultivators on Yen Ran Mountain, he still mingled in the circle of wandering cultivators and was never placed in the eyes of the great sword sections. When they met again today, this elder was all smiles. After hearing Zhang Xiashan's intentions, his smile became even more brilliant. He said that there was no problem and that the sword forging faction would welcome sect Master Qin Yu at any time. The 2 exchanged names. Zhang Xiashan finally learned that this sword forging faction elder was called Mei Shenglin. He wasn't too used to this. Zhang Xiashan stood up and bid his farewells before the sword forging faction even finished a cup of tea. Mei Shenglin sent him out of the mountain gates. Even when they were far away, he was still waving. Elder, isn't he just a heaven-splitting sword sect disciple? Is he worth your attention? A sword forging faction disciple asked, puzzled. Mei Shenglin said, right now the heaven-splitting sword sect only has 2 disciples. He turned and hurried away. He wanted to tell this matter to the sect master as soon as possible. The heaven-splitting sword sect was like the sun in the heavens. For them to be the first to visit the sword forging faction was a great deal of face. On the other side, Zhang Xiashan stopped. He turned to look at the sword forging faction. His eyes were deep and complex, revealing a bit of happiness. For the first time, he felt satisfied with his current status. Zhang Xiashan had just left, but less than 2 hours later, Qin Yu had already arrived at the sword forging faction's gates. The sword forging faction was deeply surprised that the heaven-splitting sword sect master had arrived so quickly, but they still did their best to receive him. Sect master Gu soon arrived. His white robes fluttered in the wind, making him seem like an expert. Sect master Qin. Qin Yu smiled. Sect master Gu. I am a man of my word today. After I recover from my injuries, the first thing I will do is visit the sword-forging faction." Sect Master Gu nodded. He gestured with his hand. "Please." The two flew through the gates together, heading straight for the sect master's sword peak. Along the way, they attracted countless gazes. Most of them were female disciples who had heard the news, hoping to catch a glimpse of the heaven-splitting sword sect master's glory. It was said that he wasn't too old and might even be single. If he took a liking to her, that would be a great fortune. She would become the sect master's wife. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she would ascend to the heavens in a single step. Although the chances were low, what if? Perhaps Sect Master Qin would like the female cultivators of our heaven-splitting sword sect. A cultivator's senses were sharp. In addition to the eyes of these sword-forging faction female cultivators, they were far too bold and blazing. Qin Yu's eyes inadvertently swept past them, and he immediately turned back. He spoke with Sect Master Gu and nodded earnestly. It was really a group of muscular and bronze-skinned women. Staring at him with coquettish eyes was an eyesore. At the very least, Qin Yu didn't have the fortune to enjoy it. It wasn't until he entered the sword peak and landed that the burning hot gazes that followed him finally faded away with a trace of unwillingness. Qin Yu let out a sigh of relief. He secretly decided that if he could smoothly obtain a sword whetstone today, it would be best if he came to a broken place like the sword-forging faction less in the future. "Sect Master Qin, please sit." Qin Yu cupped his hands together in thanks. As the host and guests sat down, a disciple served tea. The fragrance filled the air. Peak Mist Dragon tea is extremely rare in the world. "Sect Master Qin, please have a taste." "Thank you for your hospitality, Sect Master." After several sips of tea, the two exchanged greetings. Sect Master Gu put down his teacup and said, "The heaven-splitting sword sect has reopened. If there is anything you need help with, please feel free to ask." Qin Yu smiled. "Even if Sect Master Gu didn't say it, I would have said it. My sword sect has been reopened, and there are many things to do. We must recruit disciples and order some flying swords from the sword-forging faction." Sect Master Gu nodded. "All right." Qin Yu's visit today had raised the face of the heaven-splitting sword sect, so he naturally had to repay him. Otherwise, if the heaven-splitting sword sect suddenly ordered flying swords, he would definitely have to wait for some time. "Thank you, Sect Master Gu." Qin Yu flipped his hand. He took out an ancient coin and placed it on the table. "This money is my sect's down payment. In ancient times, when the remnant people ruled, there was once a type of immortal coin that was refined from strange stones. Because the material was so rare, it had long since gone extinct and there weren't many left in the world. But as for those that were passed down to the present, each one had an astonishing value." Sect Master Gu's eyes brightened. Ancient coin. He reached out his hand and took it. After sensing it for several breaths of time, he fell into deep thought. Qin Yu coughed. "Sect Master Gu, this ancient coin is part of my sect's collection, so there is absolutely no problem with it. If you have any objections, my sect can use other items as a down payment." No." Sect Master Gu had a calm expression. He hesitated for a moment and said, "May I ask Sect Master Qin, where did you obtain this ancient coin?" Seeing Qin Yu's puzzled expression, he explained. "I sense a trace of extremely deep sword intent from this ancient coin. That is why I was curious." Qin Yu nodded. "Sect Master Gu's senses are quite sharp. You are truly worthy of being a great swordsman. I obtained this ancient coin from an ancient battlefield, and its previous owner was a sword cultivator. Perhaps it was because it stayed with its previous owner's corpse for too long that it was infiltrated by the sword intent." Sect Master Gu's breathing quickened. He leaned forward. "Cough, there is something I must ask Sect Master Qin to tell me the truth. When you discovered this ancient coin, Did you obtain any other harvests? Qin Yu hesitated. Sect Master Gu stood up. Sect Master Qin, this matter is extremely important to my sect. As long as you can tell me the truth, no matter what the answer is, my sword-forging sect is willing to gift you 100 standard flying swords of the heaven-splitting sword sect, each of them high enough for a new disciple to use. This all right? Qin Yu nodded. Besides this ancient coin, I also found a jade slip on the corpse. But I must say in advance that I have taken a liking to this object and will not take it out to trade. As he finished speaking, he lifted his hand. Qin Yu spread open his fingers. A blood-red jade slip lay peacefully in his palm. Sect Master Gu's eyes widened. Pa! Qin Yu folded his fingers together. He stood up and bid his farewells. Sect Master Gu, I am preparing to pay a visit to the Spring Wind Sword Sect today. I will bid my farewells first. Hold on. Sect Master Gu shouted out loud. He took a deep breath and smiled. Sect Master Qin, you have come from afar as a guest, so how could you be in such a hurry? Please sit a little longer. Without waiting for Qin Yu to object, he shouted out loud, Men, bring the bag of tea leaves from my sect's fog dragon mother tree. I wish to sit down and discuss swords with Sect Master Qin. Qin Yu's lips twitched. Wasn't it supposed to be top quality fog dragon tea? How come in the blink of an eye a fog dragon mother tree had popped out? Just from the name, one could tell that these two weren't on the same level. Wasn't it supposed to be an honored guest? This change in attitude was far too quick. Ignoring Qin Yu's expression, Sect Master Gu's expression was solemn and earnest. In terms of sword cultivation, I admire Sect Master Qin, but the situation at Swallow Run Mountain is complex, and the Sword Master Guild is filled with endless internal struggles. There are some words that I would like to speak with Sect Master Qin about today. The tea arrived. It was truly good tea. The fog dragon tea from before was already top quality, but compared to this cup, the difference was like clouds and mud. Qin Yu drank a mouthful, then another mouthful. By the third mouthful, the cup was empty. Sect Master Gu's eyes flashed with pain. He coughed and said, What an unruly thing. Can't you see that Sect Master Qin's teacup is empty? Hurry up and pour. No, bring the teapot over. I will personally entertain my honored guest. Qin Yu repeatedly said that he couldn't, but in the end he couldn't compete with the warm and hospitable Sect Master Gu to personally fill his cup. Sect Master Qin, in our Swallow Run Mountain, there are several hundred large and small sword sects, with the 10 sword sects being the most respected. The central desolate Qin Empire allows us sword cultivators to govern ourselves. So in order to maintain order, the Sword Master Guild appeared. In the past, the heaven-splitting sword sect had a seat in the Sword Master Guild. According to the rules of Swallow Run Mountain, since Sect Master Qin has reopened the sect, you should take back your seat in the Sword Master Guild. Speaking to here, Sect Master Gu slapped his chest. Although my sword-forging sect is not a member of the Sword Master Guild, we have a good relationship with several of the Sword Masters. If Sect Master Qin wishes to take back your seat in the Sword Master Guild, I am willing to help you. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Thank you, Sect Master Gu. There's no need to rush this matter. Right now, the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect should focus on stabilizing the situation. Sect Master Gu, who originally thought that he had a 90% chance of success, suddenly felt like he had been stabbed in the back. He silently nodded and quietly said, Sect Master Qin is right, but my promise is still valid. If the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect has any needs, the Sword Forging sect will not refuse. Qin Yu said, Thank you, Sect Master Gu. There was a period of silence. If even a spot in the Sword Master Guild wasn't able to move Qin Yu, then anything else would only be a joke. Sect Master Gu took a deep breath and stood up. Since Sect Master Qin has sent something. Then I will get straight to the point. The jade slip in your hands is extremely important to me, as long as Sect Master Qin is willing to give it to me. The sword forging sect is willing to pay a sufficient price. My meat is awesome. Qin Yu revealed an awkward expression. He fell silent. If he didn't directly refuse, then there was a possibility. Sect Master Gu struck while the iron was hot. If Sect Master Qin has any requests, please feel free to speak. As long as I can accomplish it, I will certainly agree. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. Very well. Since Sect Master Gu is so sincere, then I will agree. But I am extremely optimistic about this item. Although I don't know what use it has, its value is bound to be high. So, if Sect Master Gu cannot accept my offer, then the transaction will be over. Sect Master Gu took a deep breath. Please speak. Qin Yu said, I need a sharpening stone. The dagger was revealed. 2 hours later, Qin Yu left the sword forging sect with half a pot of fog dragon mother treaty leaves, satisfied. Sect Master Gu didn't appear to see him off. Elder Mei Shenglin, who had received Zhang Xiashan, sent Qin Yu off with a worried expression. He expressed his sincere apologies for his sect master's rudeness. Luckily, Qin Yu didn't reveal any dissatisfaction. There was a smile on his lips the entire time. It seemed he was in a good mood. Mei Shenglin secretly let out a sigh of relief. He wondered what was wrong with the sect master today, sending off the illustrious Sect Master Qin and then joking around with each other? If this were to spread out, it would be a matter of great face. This wasn't like the sect master style. After sending off Qin Yu, Mei Shenglin hurried back. However, he was told that the sect master had gone into seclusion and that no one was to disturb him before he left. Since he had paid a visit to the sword forging sect, there was no reason for him not to go to the spring wind sword sect. And by now, Zhang Xiashan should have already passed on the message. It wouldn't be good to stand him up. Qin Yu suddenly felt that the flowing light sword was too fast. It wasn't good to use it to deliver a message. It wouldn't give people a chance to regret. Right now, he urgently wanted to summon the mountain and river sword and test out the effects of the sharpening stone. Let's go. Not long after he left, he received a message from Zhang Xiashan. Qin Yu took out the sect token and carefully sensed it, a smile on his face. Li Sumu was in seclusion and couldn't see anyone. Cough, it wasn't bad to travel fast. Little Zhang had a bright future ahead of him. Qin Yu turned and left, returning home. Chapter 1707. Jin Family Ancestral Hall. Patriarch Jin loosened his grip, and the sky-splitter sword flew out of his hand and returned to its scabbard. Its position was rather special. It was placed in front of the ancestral tablets of each generation, sharing the incense offerings of the Jin family. Seeing that the old ancestor had turned around, those who were qualified to enter the ancestral hall bowed to show their respect. Ancestor, what's the situation? One of them asked. Ancestor Jin said, the sword consciousness of the Heaven Splitter sword is damaged. Fortunately, it's not serious. It will recover in about 10 years. They were slightly relieved, but their expressions were still grave. The Jin family head said, Ancestor, the sword consciousness that can injure the heaven-splitting sword. Before he could finish, his eyes shone with a scorching heat. Patriarch Jin glanced at him. With an immortal weapon in front of us, everyone naturally covets it. However, the heaven-splitting sword sect's current situation is not yet clear. Cutting down Hu Fu in one strike and injuring the heaven-splitting sword was enough to be taken seriously. Moreover, no one could be sure if the heaven-splitting sword sect was still hiding something. Putting aside Sect Master Qin Yu, that mysterious Tao protector, the current great elder of the heaven-splitting sword sect, caused Ancestor Jin to feel a deep sense of dread. The Jin family head's eyes flashed. Old Ancestor's meaning is that we should take a look first? There are people even more worried about the heaven-splitting sword sect than us. Hufu is just an average-sized chess piece on the chessboard. The true chess player hasn't even placed his piece yet. Patriarch Jin's expression was calm. Let them act as pathfinders. Several people bowed. Old ancestor is wise. Qin Yu began an incomparably fulfilling life of seclusion. He cultivated for several days, and when he reached the limits of what his body could withstand, he would stop and summon the mountain and river sword. He would use a whetstone to polish it, and after digesting and absorbing it, he would continue cultivating. The sword whetstone was obtained from the sword forging sect. It was a stone grindstone the size of a person's arms. Its surface was extremely smooth, and when one touched it, one could feel the tiny protrusions. It was very, very small, yet exceptionally clear. The mountain river sword slowly brushed past, causing sparks to fly. Again and again, it continuously illuminated Qin Yu's face. From the outside, the mountain river sword did not seem to have changed much, but Qin Yu could clearly feel the change in its sword aura. The sharpness was gradually revealed, but this was only the beginning. Once this whetstone was completely ground to dust, the might of the mountain and river sword would definitely be extremely terrifying. Qin Yu looked forward to that day. Life was peaceful, and Qin Yu even enjoyed it a little. The only strange thing was that Midi had been acting a little mysterious lately. She was always by herself, pacing back and forth in the heaven-splitting sword sect, as if she were looking for something. Qin Yu asked, but she didn't give him an answer. Thinking about it, he didn't ask again. Cultivation was the most important thing. Inside the heaven-splitting sword sect, the cultivators responsible for the construction had already left after finishing their work. The huge mountain gate was empty and not a single person could be seen. Ruru clasped her hands behind her back as she walked along a newly opened stone staircase. She had already walked back and forth 4 times. She couldn't help but frown. It should be here, but she couldn't sense the slightest bit of its aura. Indeed, it was due to his lowered fate that he was unable to sense existences of the same level. This caused a bit of annoyance to appear on her face. She glanced at the Sword Peak Mystic Realm where Qin Yu was in seclusion and her face darkened. It's all this kid's fault. But after getting angry, he still had to do what he had to do. What should he do? Little Meat frowned and fell into deep thought. While the heaven-splitting sword sect was calm, the interior of Swallow Mountain was like an awakened volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. The reason for this was simple. If it were an ordinary sword sect, it would be fine if they reopened their mountain gates. At most, everyone would sigh in praise and say that their ancestors protected them. But the heaven-splitting sword sect was different. Its status in the past was far too high. If it really did everything according to the rules of Swallow Mountain, it would inevitably infringe upon the interests of many people. Disregarding those people who invaded the heaven-splitting sword sect's assets in the past, what was more important was the title of the 10 Sword Sect, as well as the highest authority of Swallow Mountain, the Sword Master Association. Admit defeat and give up the position of the 10 Sword Sect and the spot for the Sword Master Association? Forget it. No one here was an idiot. Something was definitely going to happen. This was something that had happened after Qin Yu cut down Hufu and the heaven-splitting sword sect reopened. It was destined. Within Swallow Mountain, countless sword sects, large and small, and countless sword cultivators were waiting for the opening of the main event. Everyone knew that this meant that Swallow Mountain's authority structure would be adjusted. The turbulence that would occur would directly cover the entirety of Swallow Mountain, and no one would be able to stay out of it. On the 30th day of Qin Yu's seclusion, it happened to be the day of the full moon. Zhang Sheshan had no choice but to stop his cultivation and rush to report. There was a guest visiting. If it were an ordinary person, he would have directly rejected them. He had done many similar things in this month, but this person couldn't. His background was far too great, and strictly speaking, he could be considered Zhang Sheshan's idol. Spring Wind Sword Sect, Sword Immortal Li Sumo. He found the Great Elder. but before Zhang Xiashan could say anything, he was waved away. I don't care about this. Zhang Xiashan nearly choked on his words. He hesitated again and again, but in the end he didn't dare to say anything. He secretly mocked himself for being as timid as a mouse as he turned and went to find the sect master. There was nothing he could do. The old sword cultivator Iron Forest wasn't here, so there were only the three of them in the heaven-splitting sword sect. If the great elder didn't care, then only the sect master could step forward. As for whether or not someone was in seclusion, there was nothing he could do. Zhang Xiashan knew the entrance to the Sword Peak Mystic Realm, but he only knew. He didn't have the authority to enter or leave. He took a deep breath, stopped and bowed. Sect Master, Spring Wind Sword Sect's Sword Immortal Li Sumu has come to pay a visit today. Luckily, Zhang Xiashan's luck was good this time. The entrance to the mystic realm soon fluctuated and Qin Yu walked out. What is he doing here? Zhang Xiashan shook his head. He thought that this was a dignified sword immortal who was rumored to be on the verge of joining the Sword Master Guild. Why would he explain anything to him? Qin Yu thought for a moment. I understand. I will go see him. With a step, his figure vanished from sight. As the sect master of the heaven-splitting sword sect, he had also obtained the approval of the sword spirit. The current heaven-splitting sword sect was similar to his own domain. Shua! Qin Yu appeared out of thin air. He cupped his hands together and smiled. Fellow Taoist Li, not long ago my injuries healed and I intended to pay a visit, but at that time you were in seclusion. Li Sumu nodded. I already know of this matter. Sect Master Qin is a man of his word, so I came here today. Qin Yu frowned. Fellow Taoist Li, if you have something to say, please come to the sect. There's no need, Qin Yu said. When I visited the sword forging sect some time ago, Sect Master Gu was very hospitable and gave me some tea leaves from the fog dragon mother tree. It is said to be quite rare. Li Sumu cupped his hands together. Then I will have to trouble you. Qin Yu secretly praised. Sword cultivators were truly a group of incomparably lovable people. He gestured with his hand. Please. After entering the sect, because there was no one around, it was quiet everywhere. He casually chose an open-air platform to entertain guests. As the host and guests sat down, Qin Yu flicked his sleeves and a full set of tea-brewing utensils appeared in front of him. He snapped his fingers and flames rose to boil water. He glanced at Li Sumu and said, Brotherly, while waiting for the water to boil, there is no harm in speaking first. Li Sumu glanced at him. He paused for a moment and lightly said, The Sword Master Guild will soon make a decision to open the Sword Faction's grand examination. He flipped his hand and took out a jade slip. There's a lot of specific details. Sect Master Qin will understand once you look through it. The original plan was for Li Sumu to leave behind this jade slip outside the sect and then bid his farewells. After all, making a trip to the heaven-splitting sword sect and entering the sect as a guest conveyed different meanings. This represented propriety and distance. Li Sumu was well aware of this. But who asked Qin Yu to have tea leaves from the fog dragon mother tree? In Swallow Mountain, any sword cultivator who loved tea knew that the sword forging sect Master Gu was incomparably rich. He didn't hesitate to spend a fortune to buy a pot of fog dragon mother tree tea leaves and regarded it as a treasure. Others couldn't even think of glancing at it. Even several sword cultivator elders of the mountain personally went to the sword forging sect and gave all sorts of hints, but none of them received a cup of fog dragon mother tree tea. Although it was hard to believe, there was no reason for Qin Yu to joke about this. Whether the tea was good or bad, he could tell with a single sniff. Qin Yu received the jade slip and probed it with his divine sense. After a moment, he drew it back, a thoughtful look on his face. Thank you for the reminder, brotherly. In his heart, he wasn't surprised by this matter. Li Sumu seemed to see through Qin Yu's thoughts. He thought for a moment and said, This time, the Sword Master Guild's opinion is relatively unanimous. This was because of the Fog Dragon Mother Tree's face. The warning was given. Simply put, the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect was currently displeased with their neighbors, so they wanted to take this chance to stir up trouble. As the water heated up, Chinyu put away the bamboo tube on the tea table. He took out an identical one and placed it on the table. He smiled without batting an eyelid. The water is ready. Let's taste it together. Lee Sumo's lips twitched. He knew that if it weren't for those final words, he wouldn't have been able to see the bamboo tube in front of him. But soon, he couldn't care about the dissatisfaction in his heart. His eyes became incomparably bright. From the moment Chinyu opened the bamboo tube, Lee Sumo smelled the fragrance of tea that made one feel relaxed and happy. After entering the water, a rich fragrance filled the air. It was like countless little hooks that instantly grabbed onto his mind. Do we need to wash the tea? Hearing this, Lee Sumo nearly jumped up. His eyes widened and he clenched his teeth. No need if Sect Master Chin is particular. You might as well give me the first rinse of the tea. Chinyu nodded. All right. Lee Sumo smiled. He carefully picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, the word happiness written all over his face. The Fog Dragon Mother Tree. It was truly the Fog Dragon Mother Tree. After so many years, he was actually able to drink another sip. He only felt that there were no regrets. After several breaths of time, Lee Sumo opened his eyes. As he looked at Chinyu, who had a calm expression and was drinking a cup in 2 gulps, his mood instantly disappeared. What a waste of a heavenly treasure! To drink such a precious tea was like a cow chewing on peonies. It was truly hateful. Lee Sumo took a deep breath and said, Sect Master Chin. He was interrupted by Chinyu. Today we will only drink tea. There is no need to speak of anything else. His refusal was straightforward and efficient. Chinyu faintly smiled. His expression could be translated into 4 words. Keep your mouth shut. He reached out and took the bamboo tube away. Lee Sumo forcefully drank 7 steeps of this pot of tea. His belly was a little round, but there was still a lingering fragrance that didn't want to leave. This immortal sword of the Spring Wind Sword Sect, someone who was said to be a great figure that would soon enter the Sword Master Council, was showing signs of burying himself to death. Chinyu coughed. I was just thinking about changing my tea set. If Brother Lee doesn't mind, I can give this set to you. Lee Sumo cupped his hands together. Farewell. He flicked his sleeves and took away the tea set, vanishing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Chinyu rubbed his face and found little Meaty, who was pacing back and forth on the stone steps. He told her what had happened. The sword sect's grand examination? Little Meaty had no expression. We didn't look for trouble, but some people came to bully us on their own initiative. Chinyu said, This is within my expectations. Listening to Lee Sumo's words, this matter has already been tacitly approved by the high-level figures of Swallow Mountain Sword Sect. Little Meaty coldly sneered. What will come sooner or later. Since they took the initiative to attack us, we might as well help them along. She paused for a moment and then said, There are some debts that should be settled. Hearing this, Chinyu asked a question that had always been in his heart. Little Meaty, is there a relationship between you and the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect? Little Meaty glanced at him. That's right. She waved her hand, not explaining any further. Let's not talk about matters of the past. Prepare yourself. Since they attacked us first, don't blame me for turning over the entire Swallow Mountain and basking it in the sun. So it was like this. Just by faking one's identity, one could easily obtain the approval of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's sword spirit? Moreover, from that great General Zhao Yuan to the imperial scholar of the Qin Empire, to the various sword cultivators of Swallow Mountain, no one had ever doubted their identities. Before entering the mystic realm of the Sword Peak, Chinyu thought that it might be because Little Meaty's methods were exquisite enough to pass off as genuine. But now, it seemed that their identity as the heaven-splitting sword sect couldn't be any more real from the start. Since this was the case, coming to Swallow Mountain was a step in Little Meaty's plan. Moreover, it had been confirmed a long time ago. Just what was she planning? Perhaps it was related to Little Meaty's recent mysterious behavior. For instance, the stone steps in front of him. Little Meaty rolled her eyes. Stop looking. Even if you stare until your eyes pop out, you won't be able to see anything. Hurry up and find some sword cultivators to join our heaven-splitting sword sect. This is the sword sect's grand examination. So let's follow the rules and make them suffer the consequences. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. Where would he go to find people at this time? Thinking for a moment, his eyes brightened. Little Meaty, I have an idea. Chapter 1708. There were hundreds of large and small sword sects in Swallow Ran Mountain, and it was said that there were millions of sword cultivators. But in reality, only 30 to 40% of the sword cultivators had proper records and genealogies on them. Most of them were vagrant cultivators who gathered and dispersed like the wind. For example, Zhang Xiaoshan was once one of them, without any background or backing. What was the use of having more people? Most of the rogue cultivators didn't have a good time, so if they wanted to stay on Swallow Ran Mountain, they had to rely on the various great sword sections. As mentioned before, regarding the relationship between humans and the Jianghu, the internal strife within Yan Ran Mountain was no less than that of the outside world. There would always be hard work that no one was willing to do, or dirty work that needed to be done. This was the reason why most wandering cultivators could establish themselves in the mountains. Independent cultivators attached themselves to the sword sect and obtained a place to live, while the sword sect used independent cultivators to achieve certain goals. They both took what they needed. Otherwise, did he really think that he could become an itinerant cultivator just by randomly choosing a place and building a cave abode? Too naive. However, there were indeed some itinerant cultivators in Swallow Ran Mountain in the truest sense of the word. Most of them had their own opportunities, obtained cave abodes of predecessors, or inherited sword immortal cultivation techniques. Their strength was extraordinary, and they were extremely difficult to deal with. The great sword sects did not want to provoke them, so they acquiesced to their existence. Every single one of them was famous in the world of loose cultivators. Hu Jiming was one of them, and he was very famous. His most glorious achievement was being hunted down by the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect master, Hu Fu. Although he was heavily injured in the end, he managed to escape alive. The reason for the enmity between the two parties was a secret within Swallow Mountain. But the enmity was definitely as deep as the ocean, and they wished for nothing more than for the death of the other party's entire family. The heaven-splitting sword sect had reopened. Hu Fu had died in battle, and the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect had fallen into chaos. Hu Jiming naturally would not miss such a good opportunity to eliminate the roots. In his own words, I, old Hu, clearly distinguish between kindness and grudges. If there's a grudge, I won't just pay back 9.5. Thanks to him, the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect's elders and Hu Fu's direct disciples had barely managed to stabilize the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect. But now it was in tatters. If it wasn't for the fact that the sect-protecting array was extremely powerful, it would have long been breached by the rogue cultivators outside and ended up being divided up cleanly. Cough. We sword cultivators are people who care about face. Previously, the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect was not a nameless sect in Yanran Mountain, and they had a good relationship with the neighbors. The moment Hu Fu died, he immediately fell out with Hu Fu. He even wanted to destroy the Heavenly Cycle Sword sect so that they could drink blood and eat meat together. Everyone was well aware of the situation, but it was not a good thing to hear about it. Therefore, there was a place for rogue cultivators to use their skills. I've already talked about how the sword sect and the independent cultivators each took what they needed, and this was a very good example to prove it. The heaven-splitting mountain range was that the Swallow, were the sect sword in Swallow, Ran Mountain that were destroyed. that those and loose cultivators that he could only tearfully preserve the heavenly cycle sword sect's foundation and assets. Perhaps there would be a day in the future when it could rise again. The heaven-splitting sword sect was the best example. So many years had passed, yet they were still able to turn things around smoothly. Of course, the heaven-splitting sword sect was the best example. It had been so many years, but they still managed to make a comeback. Of course, this was also because the heaven-splitting sword sect did not have a proper background. Back then, Hufu was one of the most outstanding disciples of the heaven-splitting sword sect. How did he survive the calamity and create the heaven-splitting sword sect? Did he think everyone was stupid? Hu Jiming was calm, surrounded by a group of rogue cultivators. The operation against the heaven-splitting sword sect was a spontaneous action of the rogue cultivators. Of course, there would not be any cultivators from the other sword sections. As a star of the rogue cultivator world, he happened to have an irreconcilable grudge with the heaven-splitting sword sect. It was only natural that he would be the leader. Of course, the so-called leader was just a title. The leader was used to gather the people and discuss how to handle the matter. Senior Hu, the heaven-splitting sword sect's array formation is indeed powerful. We have already attacked 8 times and lost many people, but we have not been able to charge in. If this continues, morale will plummet and the people will become disorganized. It will be troublesome. A rogue cultivator spoke with anger on his face. The surrounding people nodded, clearly thinking the same thing. Hu Jiming remained calm. What's the rush? Can a duck that has been trapped in the pot fly away? He looked at the crowd. It has been more than half a month since we started. Apart from the 2 minor sword sects, have you seen any other sword cultivators? Humph. As the saying goes, an unjust person finds little support. The heaven-splitting sword sect has a shady background and has always been looked down upon by the orthodox sword cultivators. As long as there is no external help, breaking through the array is only a matter of time. The rogue cultivator who spoke first coughed. Senior Hu, we understand what you are saying, but we have wasted too much time. The sword cultivators who had their official records cared a lot about their reputation. If they delayed for another half a month and still failed to break through the heaven-splitting sword sect, the situation would be ugly. When that happened, it would be them, the rogue cultivators who did not do their job, who would suffer. Hu Jiming looked at the worried crowd and said indifferently, "What's the rush? Since you know the heaven-splitting sword sect's origin, what is there to be afraid of?" His lips curled up in a mocking smile. As the saying goes, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. What a simple truth. The eyes of the surrounding rogue cultivators lit up. Senior Hu, do you know something? Please speak clearly. Hu Jiming did not relent. He flicked his finger. Just wait. After sending away the rogue cultivators, Hu Jiming looked at the heaven-splitting sword sect. The sect protecting array was still stable. He frowned and left. Moments later, beneath a large tree in the mountains, Hu Jiming cupped his hands together. Sect Master Qin, how long will you wait before you act? If we delay any longer, the hearts of rogue cultivators will crumble, and it will not be easy to clean up the mess. Across from him was Qin Yu. Qin Yu had a calm expression as he lightly said, "Brother Hu, rest assured. Since I agreed, I will definitely fulfill your wish." He glanced at Hu Jiming. 3 days. In at most 3 days, the heaven-splitting sword sect protecting array will collapse on its own. Hu Jiming was overjoyed. Late at night, 2 days later, thick clouds covered the sky, covering the full moon. The entire Swallow Mountain was shrouded in darkness. Suddenly, a deafening rumble came from where the heaven-splitting sword sect was. It was extremely powerful. The sect protecting array that had withstood a large number of rogue cultivators for nearly 20 days had collapsed. The stunned rogue cultivators were only stunned for a second before they let out excited roars and charged in without hesitation. The heaven-splitting sword sect's elders and some of the ancestral hall's direct disciples were indeed not weak. However, it was not that there were no experts among the rogue cultivators. In addition, the major sword sects had secretly set up a trap. The moment the sect protecting a ray shattered, the outcome was already decided. Hu Jiming looked at the scene in front of him with an indifferent expression. There was no sadness or joy on his face, but his eyes were exceptionally complicated. It was as if he had completed an obsession that was engraved in his heart. There was an irrepressible emptiness that wrapped around his mind. He took a deep breath and heavily exhaled. The rogue cultivator, Hu Jiming, did not let these emotions bother him for too long. He revealed a cold smile. He took a step forward and charged into the heaven-splitting sword sect. A huge battle ensued. Countless sword lights shot out from where the heaven-splitting sword sect was, illuminating the surroundings. Sword breaths collided with each other, breaking apart and dissipating. For hours later, when the horizon began to brighten, the slaughter was nearing its end. Apart from the heaven-splitting sword sect's ancestral hall, there was still the same. The cries of swords echoed out. Everywhere else had fallen into a deathly silence. Countless corpses were strewn across the ground, and blood dyed the earth red. Qin Yu stood outside the heaven-splitting sword sect's gates. He looked at this scene from afar, his expression calm and his heart unperturbed. In the past, when the heaven-splitting sword sect was destroyed, it should have been a similar scene. As the saying went, good and evil will be repaid. When Hu Fu betrayed the sect in the past, he was already entangled in karma. Today was only the result of this karma being magnified. From this point on, there would no longer be a heaven-splitting sword sect in Swallow Mountain. Everything would become history. Shua, with a step forward, Qin Yu's figure vanished from sight. When he reappeared, he was standing in front of Hu Jiming. This rogue cultivator had a tired look on his face, and his eyes were dim. But his cruel killing intent was so thick that it nearly took substance. His robes were stained with blood and torn in many places. From this, one could see how many battles he had experienced in the dark of night and how many heads he had cut off. Seeing Qin Yu appear, Hu Jiming frowned. Sect master shouldn't have appeared here. Qin Yu had a calm expression. Something like face is something that some people care about, but my sect is not. Moreover, for me to appear here, I have a sufficient position and motive. Hu Jiming frowned. He felt that the Qin Yu in front of him was indeed a bit unusual. Qin Yu lightly said, "Come out." From the ruins behind him, a figure rushed out and landed beside him, his face pale. Sect Master Qin, I have already destroyed the Grand Array. According to our agreement, you must let me leave. Ma Deng Feng trembled. He looked at Hu Jiming across from him and couldn't help but shiver. Qin Yu said, I promised him that I would let him leave alive. This is the reward for destroying the Grand Array. Hu Jiming was silent for a moment. He took a step back and said, Since this is Sect Master's intention, I will obey. Ma Dengfeng was overjoyed. Qin Yu waved his hand. He turned and left. His sword hummed as he desperately fled into the distance. Watching Ma Dengfeng's figure turn into a black dot in the distance, Qin Yu sighed. I am very curious as to what kind of deep hatred there is for brother who to be so ruthless. Hu Jiming smiled. Once I kill him, I will explain to Sect Master. He turned and left, heading straight for Ma Dengfeng. Qin Yu's complexion was calm. In this world, there was no true wildfire that couldn't burn itself out. If it wasn't thorough enough, then it could be burned a few more times. Soon Hu Jiming returned. Although he didn't speak, the faint smell of blood around him was enough to explain everything. Qin Yu heard the sounds of battle coming from the ancestral hall of the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect's main peak. Brother whose killing intent is so deep, why aren't you rushing over to help? Hu Jiming smiled. A sect's ancestral hall is not something that can be easily broken through. In their despair, the heavenly cycle sword sect's sword cultivators might choose to destroy themselves. I have killed enough people today. I will just watch from afar and won't participate in the final battle. In any case, they will never let a single person from the heavenly cycle sword sect go. Qin Yu thought for a moment. Brother, who is a smart person. What he said was definitely the reason, but it wasn't the entire reason. For instance, a sect's ancestral hall would inevitably contain the sect's most important treasures, or at least a large portion of them. Hu Jiming's status was that of a true rogue cultivator that couldn't be controlled. If he wanted to live a stable life in the future, he couldn't be too greedy. Sect Master praises me too much. Hu Jiming smiled and pointed. Sect Master's appearance today has definitely fallen into the eyes of some people, so there is no need to hide it anymore. Let's go over there. The view is better there. The two flew to a mountain peak near the main peak's ancestral hall. They stood side by side, watching the heavenly cycle sword sect's final struggle. Chapter 1709. Hu Jiming had a calm expression. I can now answer the sect master's question. Qin Yu nodded. Brother, who? Please speak. Hu Fu and I are cousins. The first sentence was a heavy one. The truth is that all the grudges in the world are engraved in one's heart. Once they are spoken of, they become cliché stories. Hu Fu was the older cousin, and Hu Jiming was the younger cousin. The two of them were born in a narrow river valley in Swallow Mountain. The children of the village knew from an early age that what flew in the sky weren't meteors, but immortal sword cultivators. And becoming a sword cultivator was their greatest dream. The two 12 to 13-year-old youths finally had the chance to become sword cultivators. Their luck was good. They both had good talent, and they stood out in the examination. This was the first time they stepped onto a flying sword. Led by their sect elders, they returned to the sword sect. On that night, the two youths were so excited that they couldn't sleep. They made a vow to each other that they would work hard in their cultivation in the future and strive to become true flying swords as soon as possible. The one who taught the new disciples the sword art was a gentle and beautiful senior apprentice sister. Her smile was very beautiful, making one feel as if it were spring. No matter how bitter or tiring it was, the two youths felt that it couldn't compare to the smile of their senior apprentice sister. Their talent was good, and they worked hard. The two youths' sword cultivation rapidly rose, and they gradually received the focus of the sect's training. The accident occurred because the sect master was recruiting a disciple to be his legacy inheritor, and the target of selection was one of the two cousins who had already grown into tall and straight youths. Hu Fu had used some methods to frame Hu Jiming, turning him from a proud son of the sword sect into a traitor that everyone wanted to kill overnight. The reason I was able to survive was because my luck was good. After my senior apprentice, sister, sent me a message, she escaped into a large river and used the water to hide herself. Secondly, I should thank Hu Fu. If it weren't for him destroying the heaven-splitting sword sect 30 years later, I wouldn't have lived to this day. These words were filled with deep meaning. Hu Jiming was actually a genuine disciple of the heaven-splitting sword sect. Qin Yu had a calm expression. He thought for a moment and said, Indeed, our hatred is as deep as the sea. Hu Jiming lightly said, Sect Master must have thought that I was too heartless to destroy the heaven-splitting sword sect because of my own personal grudges. But in reality, if that's all, then I'll just kill Khufu and settle this grudge. His expression was heavy, and his voice was icy cold. Hu Fu personally killed senior sister when she was pregnant with his child. Qin Yu frowned. Hu Jiming said, Hu Fu is dead and the heavenly cycle sword sect is destroyed. This secret of the past is no longer a secret. With the sect master's power and status, it's a simple matter for him to investigate thoroughly. Qin Yu asked, why would he do that? For the sake of power, for the sake of status, he wants to marry another woman to increase his bargaining chips. Senior sister must die, and the unborn child in her belly must die as well. Hu Fu remained expressionless. So, I will completely destroy everything that he exchanged the lives of my senior apprentice sister and the child in her womb for. Bang! With a loud explosion, the barely maintained layer of restrictions in the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect's ancestral hall suddenly exploded and completely collapsed. The dozen or so wandering cultivators surrounding him couldn't dodge in time and were sucked in, losing their lives. The Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect is finished. Hu Jiming glanced around and lightly said, the eyes of the wandering cultivators that were forced back by the explosion of the restrictions turned blazing hot, like a pack of hungry wolves. Kill them all. Don't let a single one escape. Brothers, charge! Hu Jiming turned around. Sect Master, let's go. Qin Yu nodded. According to our agreement, from now on, Brother Hu, you are my heaven-splitting sword sect's protector. He paused for a moment and said, everything in the sword sect will be rebuilt according to the old rules. If you don't like it, you can have someone change it. Hu Jiming shook his head. All grudges have been resolved, and the knots in my heart have been resolved. If I still cling to these things, I really have no way to continue on the road of cultivation. He looked at Qin Yu. Also, although the reputation of the heaven-splitting sword sect's protector is resounding, our sect has far too few people right now. There's no meaning in being a lone commander. Qin Yu's lips curled up. Protector, Hu, this is the mission I will give you next. Choose 11 sword cultivators with clean backgrounds and have them enter our heaven-splitting sword sect. Hu Jiming thought for a moment. Sect Master wants to deal with the upcoming sword sect examination, right? As he thought, even if they were wandering cultivators, as long as they were strong, they would have enough channels to obtain information. Qin Yu nodded. That's right. Since he had spoken, he didn't want to hide anything. Hu Jiming shook his head. Sect Master's thoughts are good, but you underestimate us too much. The various great sword sects of Swallow Run Mountain, or perhaps towards us towards those wandering cultivators, they have too high of an expectation. The sword sect examination is an opportunity that some people want to use to prevent the heaven-splitting sword sect from reclaiming its position as one of the 10 sword sects and joining the Sword Master Guild. If we want to break through their plans, we must at least rank in the top 10 of the sword sect examination. He looked at Qin Yu, his tone earnest. It will be difficult, extremely difficult, and there is almost no chance of success. The Great Sword Sect is quite skilled in raising disciples. Qin Yu said, Protector, Hu, what you need to do is find 11 sword cultivators that you can trust as soon as possible. As for the other matters, my sect and the Great Elder will naturally make arrangements. Hu Jiming nodded. If so, then this matter won't be difficult. I will return to the sect in 2 days. He turned and left. But before he took 2 steps, he stopped. With a slightly unnatural expression, he cupped his hands together and bowed. This subordinate bids his farewell. Whoosh! A sword shadow shot into the skies. Done! Qin Yu smiled. He turned and said, You've been watching for so long. Are you not planning to come out? After a brief period of silence, space twisted. A figure walked out, holding a sword in his hand, his aura swift and fierce. South Sea Sword Sect Su Jing greets. Sect Master Qin. Qin Yu arched an eyebrow. I have never heard of any conflict between the South Sea Sword Sect and the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. Su Jing shook his head. Sect Master has misunderstood. I am only surprised that you would appear here. I have no other meaning. Qin Yu said, So that's how it is. Has Elder Su's curiosity been satisfied? If not, then you can continue peeping for a while longer. I can pretend that I don't know anything. Su Jing frowned. His tone became light. There is no need. I don't have much time to waste on meaningless matters. Farewell. He turned and left. Qin Yu suddenly said, Elder Su Jing, Hu Jiming is now a protector of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. and the only one who knows of this matter is you. If anything happens to him, even if there is no evidence, I will still blame it on you. Moreover, I guarantee that I will not hesitate to pay any price to seek justice for Protector Hu." Su Jing's back stiffened. In the end, he didn't look back. He clenched his teeth and left. Looking at his back, Qin Yu had a faint look in his eyes. The facts proved that Qin Yu's reputation had a decent deterrent effect in Swallow Run Mountain. His goal of scaring people had been successfully achieved. 2 days later, a completely unharmed Hu Jiming led 11 sword cultivators to the gates of the heaven-splitting sword sect. Zhang Xiaoshan went out to greet them. As he swept his eyes over them, he subconsciously frowned, not saying anything. Their strength was mediocre. To use this word to describe the sword cultivators that Hu Jiming had brought back could be considered praise. In the main hall, facing Qin Yu and Little Meaty, Hu Jiming's face flushed red with embarrassment. "I don't know why, but when I went to look for the wandering cultivators I knew in the past, all of them avoided me like a tiger." After hearing the news, none of them dared to agree. Right now, these 10 people had all been forcibly recruited by him through coaxing and coaxing. It was already very difficult to gather enough people. So how could he still pursue cultivation? Qin Yu could roughly guess the reason. He looked at Little Meaty and saw that she didn't express her opinion. He calmed down a little and smiled. "It's fine. If you can bring back these 10 people, then Protector who has performed a great merit. I will remember this for you." Hu Jiming's complexion improved a great deal. He said he didn't know just now, but that was only to save face. He had asked so many people, and after some hesitation he had learned the truth. In the end, it was because the heaven-splitting sword sect itself wasn't strong enough. Otherwise, these wandering cultivators would have racked their brains and desperately tried to squeeze their way in. There would have been no need for him to forcefully drag them in. "Protector Hu, you've worked hard. Please go and rest." Hu Jiming stood up and bid his farewells. There were only the 2 of them left in the hall. Qin Yu coughed. "Little Meaty, I've already solved the problem of manpower." These words caused Little Meaty to roll her eyes. How could he have the nerve to say such things? Qin Yu spread out his hands. "Time is tight, so I can only make do with it. Moreover, don't I have you? One of my flesh can fight against 10. As long as you are willing to help. Even a group of clay statues can become elite soldiers. Does flattery cost nothing? Young Master Qin, you make it sound so simple. Why don't I just leave it to you?" Qin Yu pretended not to hear. What else could he do, besides being ridiculed a few more times? There wasn't any meaning to it. Little Meaty only grumbled. If she really couldn't do it, she wouldn't be like this. But it would definitely take a bit more effort. It was understandable that she wasn't in a good mood. She jabbed at Qin Yu a few more times. Seeing that Qin Yu was still pretending to be deaf and mute, she clenched her teeth and walked away, leaving behind a few angry words. "Remember clearly that you owe me another debt." If he owed, then he owed. In any case, Qin Yu couldn't clearly calculate this debt anymore. This was the so-called, when you have too many debts, you don't need to worry about them. After another 3 days, the Sword Master Guild finally reached an agreement. They issued orders to the various great sword sects of Swallow Mountain. 5 days from now, Sword Prison would open, and the disciples of the various sword sects would enter to gain experience. They would be ranked according to the number of demons they killed and the depth they explored. This was the great examination of the sword sects. In this examination, the winners would obtain many benefits. The most astonishing point was that the top 10 sword sects would automatically become the new top 10 sword sects and form a new Sword Master Guild. There had never been a precedent for this before. Of course, the above was just a more general conceptual explanation. The specific details were very complicated and detailed. For instance, how would the status of a sword sect disciple be determined? Only new disciples that had been in the sect for less than 20 years had the qualifications to participate in the examination. For instance, every sword sect team, in order to avoid unnecessary casualties, could send out a sect elder to act as a temporary Dao protector. In a critical moment of life or death, they could save someone. But once they did this, it meant that the team would be eliminated and they would lose the qualifications to compete. In addition, there were many other rules, over 100 in total. They basically eliminated the possibility of using improper methods to obtain a high ranking. Sword prison, within the Grand Hall, little Meaty whispered to herself. As she recalled this name, her eyes gradually brightened. She had thought of a way. From the time the Sword Master Guild sent out the news to the announcement of the opening date of Sword Prison, less than 10 days had passed. Compared to previous years, this could be said to have been extremely rushed. A strange aura surged within Swallow Mountain. This was because sword cultivators were well aware of the reason why the sword sect examination was held in such a hurry. The heaven-splitting sword sect was indeed formidable. Sect Master Chinyu had killed Hu Fu with a single sword strike. But now that the sect had just opened and it was said that the mountain gates had just been repaired, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there were 1,000 things to do. With the current momentum of the heaven-splitting sword sect, it wouldn't be a problem for them to participate in the sword sect examination in several years. But now perhaps the 12 spots to enter sword prison would be enough to make things difficult for them. In these past days, who didn't know of the news that had spread through Swallow Mountain? Even if the heaven-splitting sword sect managed to barely form a team, what sort of results could they obtain? Once they were at the bottom, would they still have the face to struggle for the title of top 10 sword sect or the seat of the Sword Master Guild? This was an open conspiracy. Chapter 1710. There were large rivers in Yanran Mountain, but they all flowed out of the mountain, unable to form a lake between the peaks. There wasn't even a lake, let alone a vast ocean. Thus, the name of the South Sea Sword Sect exposed their origins. This was a group of outsiders. As an outsider, the South Sea Sword Sect had not only flourished in Yanran Mountain, but had also become one of the 10 sword sects and had a place in the Sword Master Guild. One's own strength was the foundation and skill was an aid. But everyone had to admit that having the support of a local force was the key. The Cold Frost Sword Sect, a veteran top sword cultivator force in Yanran Mountain, was the local force that had helped the South Sea Sword Sect get to where they were today. Thus, this time the South Sea Sword Sect, which could have stayed out of this matter, had directly raised the issue at the Sword Master Guild, and was the first to propose the sword sect examination. The various sword sects knew very well that this was returning a favor and helping the Cold Frost Sword Sect solve its problems. After all, the Cold Frost Sword Sect had played a not too glorious role when the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had been in trouble. In fact, the Cold Frost Sword Sect's current position in the Sword Master Guild had been taken from the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. The South Sea Sword Sect and the Cold Frost Sword Sect had joined forces, and with the help of the Sword Master Guild members, this sudden sword sect examination had come about. If not for the Spring Wind Sword Sect and the other 2 Swordmaster Guild members opposing this, the matter would have been settled a few days earlier. Sect Master, isn't this too risky? We've already gained a foothold in Yanran Mountain, and there's no need to be so radical. If there's an accident, or if the truth is exposed, the efforts of our ancestors will be wasted. Su Jing spoke in a low voice, his expression solemn. He objected to this matter. First, this was indeed not in line with the interests of the South Sea Sword Sect. Second, for some reason, the face of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's Sect Master Qin kept appearing in front of Su Jing these days, and his heart palpitated. His instincts told him that it was best not to become enemies with the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. The South Sea Sword Sect's Sect Master was Su Jing's senior brother. The two had grown up and practiced swordsmanship together and had a close relationship. It was precisely because of this that he knew of the sect's fundamental secrets and had the courage to voice his opinion. Wei Heng shook his head. "Junior brother, I know what you mean. but there's no turning back. We have no other choice this time." "How could you?" Before he could finish, he was interrupted. Wei Hung said in a low voice, "This involves a contract that Master signed in the past. Our South Sea Sword Sect is helping the Cold Frost Sword Sect solve their troubles. But it is not just helping the Cold Frost Sword Sect." Su Jing's expression changed slightly as he thought of some old matters. Looking at the serious expression on the sect master's face, he took a deep breath and nodded. "Since that's the case, we can only hope that things will proceed smoothly." Wei Hung nodded. "Don't worry, nothing will happen. The heaven-splitting sword sect will not be able to escape this calamity." There were some things that he didn't make clear. It wasn't that he didn't trust Su Jing, but that a leader must have the forbearance and shrewdness. Moreover, before the dust settled, anything could happen. The fewer people who knew the truth, the greater the chance of success. "Junior brother, this time you will personally lead the disciples of my sect into the sword prison. Remember, stay away from the people of Heavenly Sword Sect." Su Jing's expression changed slightly. She bowed and said yes. The day before the sword prison opened, the 12 sword cultivators that Midi had brought into the secret realm of Sword Peak for emergency training, Zhang Xiashan included, finally walked out. This caused the outwardly calm but inwardly anxious Hu Jiming to breathe a sigh of relief. He was truly worried that something would happen to these people. "How is it? Are you all right?" Outside Zhang Xiashan, the 11 sword cultivators all shook their heads in unison. They couldn't suppress the excitement on their faces. "Senior Hu, I really have to thank you for this matter. Coming to the heaven-splitting sword sect with Senior was the best decision I've made in my life. Senior, don't worry. This time we will definitely not disappoint the sword sect." Looking at the confident and confident sword cultivators across from him, Hu Jiming suspected that they had been hypnotized by someone. In just a few short days, where did this group of weaklings get such confidence from? In this sword sect examination, even an idiot would know that there was definitely a problem. Would the freezing frost sword sect and South Sea sword sect give you a chance? There was no need to say that there was no under-the-table manipulation in the sword sect examination. Fairness was always relative. Moreover, in the current Swallow Mountain, there were no great sword sects that were happy to see the heaven-splitting sword sect rise and harm their own interests. There was bound to be danger. Shua, Midi appeared out of thin air. Hu Jiming swallowed the words he was about to say and bowed. "Greetings, great elder. Sword prison will open soon. Qin Yu, you will personally lead the others in." Qin Yu frowned. He looked at Midi and nodded. Okay, this was her own decision, and the two sides hadn't discussed it before. But Qin Yu believed that Midi must have her own reasons for doing so. Qin Yu turned around. "Protector Hu, I am not sure where sword prison is. I will need you to lead the way." Hu Jiming forced a smile. He rubbed his face and clenched his teeth. "How about I lead the others in? I have been to sword prison several times and have more experience than the sect master." He didn't even know where sword prison was, and yet he dared to lead the others in. It would be strange if this small group of weaklings didn't all die. He was the one who brought these people to the heaven-splitting sword sect. To watch helplessly as they died was something Hu Jiming couldn't bring himself to do. If it were him, perhaps he might be able to save their lives. As for ranking, there was no need to consider that at all. Qin Yu revealed a look of appreciation. For Hu Jiming to say such words today was enough for him to become a protector of the heaven-splitting sword sect. "You cannot." Midi decisively refused. She waved her hand. "Hurry up and go." Qin Yu smiled and nodded. "Protector Hu, lead the way." Hu Jiming took a deep breath, but as he was shrouded in Midi's indifferent gaze, he felt weak in his heart and couldn't speak. He could only brace himself and nod. Whoosh! The group shot into the skies. Just as they left the range of the sect, Hu Jiming lightly coughed. But this time, Qin Yu didn't give him a chance to speak again. Protector who? I already understand your intentions. Don't worry, I didn't bring them into sword prison to die. You are also a member of the heaven-splitting sword sect, so you must have faith in me, in the great elder. He quietly added that the latter part was the main point. Qin Yu didn't know what Midi had done to Zhang Xiashan and the others in the mystic realm of the Sword Peak. But since she wanted Qin Yu to personally go, she definitely had the confidence to protect herself. Moreover, Qin Yu didn't know whether or not it was an illusion, but he always felt that Midi was secretly plotting something. For instance, during the opening of Sword Prison, she had been a bit proactive. It wasn't that Midi hadn't done anything in the past, but the attitude she had displayed this time made Qin Yu feel that she had taken the initiative. This wasn't my Midi style. She had always been impatient towards troublesome matters. As these thoughts raced through his mind, he immediately suppressed them. Qin Yu looked up into the distance. He could already feel some strange auras between the heavens and earth. Was that Sword Prison? The feeling it gave off was indeed extremely oppressive and gloomy. Along the way, the group from the heaven-splitting sword sect attracted many gazes. When they saw Qin Yu, most of them had solemn expressions. But as they looked at the hastily formed group behind him, their complexions couldn't help but turn strange. This was the group from the heaven-splitting sword sect. Forgive me for saying this, but were they going to die? Soon, news of the heaven-splitting sword sect's small group spread through the various great sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain. Many people found the news in the letter hard to believe. That's right, this time the Freezing Frost Sword Sect and the South Sea Sword Sect had joined forces to launch an attack from above, catching the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect off guard. But from the sharp methods that the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect had displayed before, it didn't seem as if they would be easily schemed against. How could they be so easily grasped at their weak spot and put together such a group that only had a mediocre combat strength? Or perhaps this was only a smokescreen. This group that seemed like they couldn't even withstand a single blow was actually waiting for a critical moment to catch the various great sword sects off guard in Sword Prison. That's right, this was likely to be the case. The sword cultivators of the various great sects couldn't help but reveal solemn expressions. But very soon, this worry was dispelled. The members of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's team of sword cultivators were all identified. They were not experts of the sword way who had concealed themselves. They were genuine, independent cultivators of Swallow Ran Mountain. Moreover, they were relatively low in the group of wandering cultivators. The name of the small group of mediocre cultivators was confirmed. This time, the sect master of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, Qin Yu, had personally led a team here. This was a bit unexpected and a bit frightening. But what was tested in Sword Prison was the strength of the disciples. No matter how strong Qin Yu was, what use was it? As soon as he attacked, he would be eliminated. No one could understand why the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect would make such a move. If they had put together such a group, then they might as well have refused to participate from the start. Perhaps their situation would have been better. They had arrived at Sword Prison. Qin Yu landed first. He and the small group of mediocre cultivators behind him received the gazes of almost all the sword cultivators here. Surprise, shock, disbelief, it was actually true. Although they had heard about it, they still found it unbelievable when they saw it with their own eyes. Qin Yu turned a blind eye to all of this. He led the people behind him and landed in an open space. Soon, the area around the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect was empty. Hu Jiming's lips twitched. He thought to himself, "You bastards, aren't you being too obvious?" But thinking about it, if he were in their shoes, there was a high chance he would have made the same choice. He was left speechless. At this time his complexion changed. He hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, Sword Immortally." Li Sumu glanced at him and nodded. He said to Qin Yu, "You shouldn't have come here." Since he had entered the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect that day, that in itself was a kind of declaration. He wasn't afraid that more people would see him today. Qin Yu smiled. It's fine. My sect is here. I want to see just who can stir up a storm. Li Sumu shook his head. He thought for a moment and said, This matter might be more complicated than you think. Be careful. He turned and left. Could a cup of tea brewed from the fog dragon mother tree have such an effect? Qin Yu didn't think so. It seemed that the spring wind sword sect situation in the Sword Master assembly wasn't too good. The enemy of an enemy was a friend. This wasn't a difficult truth to understand. Just as Li Sumu left, Sect Master Gu flew over. His hands were held behind his back and his expression was indifferent. He still exuded the air of a great master. The immortal swords, I promised the heaven-splitting sword sect, will soon be ready. Once the sword sect's examination ends, my sect will send someone to deliver them. After he finished speaking, he nodded to Qin Yu and left. This was also a silent declaration of his position. Whether it was Li Sumu or Sect Master Gu, for them to come here at this time represented, to a certain degree, their support for the heaven-splitting sword sect. As expected, the eyes of the surrounding people began to change. At this time, there was a loud rumbling that came from deep underground. The ground caved in, forming a giant, bottomless black hole. Woo-woo, like the howling of strong winds, and also like the mournful wails of the dead. There was a sound like someone blowing a breath of cold air in the back of one's ears on a dark night. Hiss! Their hair stood on end. Sword Prison had opened. Chapter 1711. Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. The moment Sword Prison opened, Luo Meru sensed something. She looked up into the distance at the darkening skies. This was the aura of Sword Prison leaking out, affecting the weather outside. After sensing for several breaths of time, she smiled. She was still alive. This was the most important point. Otherwise, after spending so much effort, it would be all for naught. Not only would that delay her time, but it would also affect her future arrangements. With a thought, the great sect-protecting array at the entrance of the heaven-splitting sword sect opened. Thick sword breath soared into the skies, isolating a small part of the world. And within this small world, there was a boiling pool of swords. Anything that was alive would be cut to pieces by the trillions of sword breaths once it entered. In the current heaven-splitting sword sect, there was only Luo Meru. She didn't have to worry about anything. She walked within the sword breath. Wherever she went, the sword breath parted like water, not daring to touch her at all. When Luo Meru came to a stop, she saw the stone steps she had walked through countless times. Now, as the sword breath swam around, the space around it slightly twisted, as if there was something hidden within. Luo Meru lifted a hand and pointed at the air, like a boulder falling into the sea. It instantly set off massive waves that twisted the space around the stone steps. Sword Prison. It was said that the sword breath was boundless and dense like a prison. But at the same time, it was also a specific characteristic. That was, this place was a prison. What was suppressed and sealed away wasn't just the endless, wild sword breath that came from some unknown place in Sword Prison. There were also all sorts of sword demons that were born within this sword breath. During the sword sect's grand examination, when cultivators of the various sects entered to adventure, the main danger came from these sword demons. Before entering, Hu Jiming hurriedly told Qin Yu everything he knew about Sword Prison. He didn't expect it to be of much use, but at least he wouldn't be blinded by it. Protector Hu, rest assured. Hu Jiming nodded with a heavy expression. He really did find it hard to rest assured. Sect Master must be careful. As long as there is life, there is hope. I won't say anything else. I will wait here for you to return. Qin Yu thought for a moment. I don't think the feng shui of the entrance to Sword Prison is good. If Protector Hu wants to wait, it would be best if you stayed as far away as possible. He turned and waved his hand. Let's go. The opening of the Sword Prison signified the start of the major examination of the sword sect. While the two of them were talking, Many sword cultivators had already rushed in. Sometimes it did make sense that if one step was faster, all the steps would be faster. Of course, the prerequisite was that he had to ensure that he was strong enough. Otherwise, the faster he rushed, the earlier he would die. People would die in the sword prison. In fact, every time the sword prison was opened, the number of casualties would not be small. Although the sword sects would send experts to act as temporary protectors to ensure that the elite disciples of the sect wouldn't be severely injured, the sword sects didn't have many experts. However, once the Tao protector intervened, it meant that he had failed, and the sword sect he belonged to would lose the chance to continue fighting for the rankings. The rankings of the sword sect's exam were directly related to the most important benefits of every single sword sect. As a result, the Tao protectors wouldn't act rashly. In other words, as long as the Tao protectors weren't completely annihilated, even if there were casualties, they would tacitly allow it. Watching Qinyu and the others fly towards the entrance of Sword Prison, Hu Jiming's complexion changed. As he mulled over his words just now, he felt that there was a deeper meaning to them. Thinking about it, Qinyu turned and flew away. Since the feng shui here wasn't good, it was best to stay as far away as possible. It was fine as long as he could see the entrance. Everything in front of him darkened. After several breaths of time, light reappeared. Qinyu squinted his eyes, adapting to the special light underground. The reason that it wasn't pitch black underground was because there was a special kind of moss growing on the surface of the rock walls. In the darkness, they emitted a weak light that was barely enough to illuminate the surroundings. However, because the light was green, it caused one to feel a bit more oppressive underground. Wherever one looked, there was a dense energy. Qinyu swept his eyes around and didn't sense anything wrong. He waved his hand and said, "Follow me." He casually chose a direction and hurried away. There were many sword cultivators at the entrance. It wasn't a good place to talk. Moreover, in the current situation, avoiding the eyes of the surrounding sword cultivators was the best choice for the heaven-splitting sword sect. In terms of structure and environment, Sword Prison could be viewed as an underground labyrinth. There were countless forks that led in different directions. The only difference was that if one wanted to leave Sword Prison, they didn't need to worry about getting lost. As long as they continued to choose a path that led upwards, then as long as their luck wasn't too bad, they would eventually be able to return to the entrance. Shua. Qinyu stopped and turned around. Speak. When you were in the mystic realm of the Sword Peak, what instructions did the Great Elder give us? Little Meaty hadn't discussed this with him before making a decision. Zhang Sheshan stepped forward and cupped his hands together. The Great Elder ordered us to obey the sect master's orders and go all the way down. Qinyu blinked. After Zhang Sheshan finished speaking, he had already retreated. So, there really wasn't anything else. Toothache. You couldn't help but rub his temples. It was just a single sentence. What was the difference between saying it and not saying it? The only useful thing was the words go all the way down. But you didn't even say where to go. That's all? Think about it carefully. Did the Great Elder say anything else? You didn't give up. But in response to him, the 12 people on the other side all shook their heads in unison. Little Meaty, consider yourself ruthless. You took a deep breath. Let's go. As for where to go, what were they going to do? What dangers lay ahead? He didn't know anything. Once he left Sword Prison, he had to have a serious and thorough chat with Little Meaty. He had to change his bad habit of being secretive and speaking incoherently. If he wasn't careful, he might even die. An hour after entering Sword Prison, the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's team finally encountered the first wave of sword demons. Although they had the name Sword Demons, they were more similar to resentful spirits and similar existences. They didn't have a physical body, and the swords in their hands were condensed from sword breath. But their killing power was formidable. At this time, the weakness of the underdog squad was revealed. Beneath the surprise attack of the 2 sword demons, They fell into chaos and nearly gave up their first kill in a single encounter. Luckily, Zhang Sheshan had decent combat experience. He was able to block the first wave of the 2 sword demons and buy time for the other members of the underdog squad to respond. Qin Yu's eyebrows relaxed. The underdog squad had formed a sword array with Zhang Sheshan as the main attacker and the others as support. The might of this formation was actually quite good. A moment later, the 2 sword demons were beheaded one after another and vanished from sight. On the surface of the jade card in Qin Yu's hand, there were 2 more red dots. This represented the gains of the heaven-splitting sword sect. This jade card was created by the sword master. It could automatically collect the aura emitted by the sword demons after they were killed and accurately record their data. In addition, as the 2 sword demons were killed, traces of pure sword breath seeped out. Zhang Sheshan and the others quickly sat down cross-legged to absorb it. When they opened their eyes, even Zhang Sheshan revealed a bit of joy. It could be seen that the sword breath released by the sword demons after they were killed was very beneficial to them. And this was another form of compensation that the disciples of the sword sect could obtain for participating in the sword sect's examination. Otherwise, they couldn't just shout out the slogan, "Love my sect," and not give any benefits at all, right? They couldn't just send people to risk their lives in sword prison, right? There was no such reasoning in this world. With their first victory, the morale of the underdog squad was greatly boosted. Some of the nervousness in their hearts dissipated along with it. Qin Yu glanced at the 2 red dots on the surface of the jade card. He turned his hand and put it away. He felt that the confidence of these boys had come a bit too early. Although he didn't know much about sword prison, through Hu Jiming's words, it wasn't strange. He judged that these 2 sword demons were only the most ordinary characters in sword prison. The true dangers were still to come. With the strength they had revealed so far, it was hard to say just how long they could last. Of course, Meaty must have given them a hidden card. Otherwise, these boys wouldn't be so spirited after leaving the Sword Peak. He hoped that their hidden card was a bit stronger. The road to the depths of Sword Prison would definitely be difficult. Did you see clearly? In which direction did the heaven-splitting sword sect team go? The Triad Sword Sect elder had a serious expression. The 2 disciples nodded repeatedly. Elder, don't worry. The 2 of us saw it clearly. They did go in that direction. The elder let out a breath of relief. He smiled very good. You 2 have done well. He waved his hand. Let's go. He led the 12 sword cultivators of the Triad Sword Sect in the opposite direction without hesitation. Sword Prison was extremely dangerous, and one could die anywhere. But dangers were also divided into levels. Right now, the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect was a walking disaster. Anyone who got close to them would suffer. So, cherish your life and leave Heaven's Sword Sect. This had already become a tacit understanding among the sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain during the opening of Sword Prison. But was it really like that? An hour later, the Triad Sword Sect elder's head rolled on the ground. His eyes were wide open, filled with fear and despair. He would never have imagined that he would encounter a high-ranked sword demon in the shallow region of Sword Prison. And among them, there was even a shadow sword demon who would only appear in the depths of Sword Prison. This Triad Sword Sect elder was caught off guard and was severely injured by a disciple possessed by the shadow sword demon. That was why he was killed directly and didn't even have the time to send out a distress signal. A moment later, several figures appeared at the place where the Triad Sword Sect elder was massacred. The Triad Sword Sect disciples, lying on the ground, looked haggard, their flesh and blood sucked dry. This scene caused the faces of the Sword Prison's patrol team to change dramatically. Ordinary sword demons would not do such a thing when they killed sword cultivators. Those who liked to devour the flesh and blood of sword cultivators were all high-ranked sword demons of Sword Prison. Among them, the Shadow Sword Demon was the best example. Based on the current situation, They could basically confirm that the Triad Sword Sex team was massacred because they were attacked by a high-ranked sword demon. But this was still the shallow region of Sword Prison. Under normal circumstances, there would not be any high-ranked sword demons. After a careful investigation, they did not find any other problems. After a short discussion, the Sword Prison's patrol team sent the investigation report to the Sword Master Guild. They concluded that it was a high-ranked sword demon that appeared by accident. The Sword Master Guild approved of this judgment and ordered the Sword Prison's patrol team to quickly search the surrounding area to ensure that the high-ranked sword demon had returned to the depths of Sword Prison after devouring the flesh and blood. This matter came to an end. When the Triad Sword Sect learned that all the disciples, including the elders, died in Sword Prison, their first reaction was that they were involved in the heaven-splitting sword sect incident. Otherwise, how could they all die in such a short period of time, when the team was still in the shallow region of Sword Prison? It was a commotion, attracting a lot of attention until the Sword Master Guild was alerted. A sword master, who had some friendship with the Triad Sword Sect's old ancestor, came forward personally. After reprimanding them, he explained the matter clearly. Nothing could be decided. The probability of a high-ranked sword demon appearing in the shallow region of Sword Prison was very small. But in the past, when Sword Prison opened, they did appear. They could only blame the Triad Sword Sect for being unlucky. It had nothing to do with others. The Sword Prison had just opened, and a team of sword sects had already been massacred. Moreover, it was a rather influential force like the Triad Sword Sect. Outside Sword Prison, the sword cultivators who were waiting for the result were subconsciously shocked. They had a feeling that the opening of Sword Prison this time would not be so simple.